I will marry you one day. 10 words, spoken by a 10-year-old girl to one of England's most powerful men. He laughed. She didn't. A decade later, that girl returned, not as a dreamer, but as a woman who'd spent every single year preparing for war disguised as courtship. This is the story of Liora Vance, the girl who made a promise no one believed, the woman who kept it anyway. If you want to see how patience becomes power, how silence becomes strategy, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The Thornfield Summer Garden Party of 1808 was the kind of event where futures were decided over champagne and carefully orchestrated introductions. Liora Vance wasn't supposed to be there. She was 10 years old, skinny as a rail, with dirt under her fingernails from climbing the oak tree by the east gate. Her mother, a distant cousin of the Thornfield family, invited more out of obligation than affection, had told her to stay in the children's wing, to be quiet, to not embarrass them. Liora had nodded, then promptly ignored every word. She'd slipped through the French doors while the adults were distracted by some scandal involving Lady Pemberton and a married viscount. The garden sprawled before her like something from a storybook, perfectly manicured hedges, fountains that actually worked, roses that didn't have aphids eating them alive. And there, standing alone near the marble fountain, was Duke Alaric Thornfield. She'd seen him before, of course, everyone had. He was 23, tall in that way that made people step aside without being asked, with dark hair that fell just wrong enough to suggest he didn't care what anyone thought. His face was the kind artists probably bothered him about. Sharp jawline, eyes that looked gray in some lights, and nearly black in others. But it wasn't his looks that made Liora stop walking. It was the way he stood, completely still. Like he was alone even though there were 200 people 50 feet away. Like he'd figured out how to exist in a separate world while technically occupying the same space as everyone else. She didn't know why she approached him. Didn't know why her feet kept moving when her brain was screaming at her to turn around. "You look sad," she said. He turned, looked down. His expression didn't change much, just a slight lift of one eyebrow. "Do I?" "Yes." She tilted her head, studying him the way she studied the stray cats behind the butcher shop. "Are you?" That's an intrusive question from someone I don't know. "I'm Liora. Now you know me." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Not quite. "Duke Alaric Thornfield," he said, with the tone of someone who'd introduced himself 1,000 times and found it boring every single time. "I know who you are. Everyone knows who you are." "Then why ask if I'm sad? You should already know everything about me, apparently." She shrugged. "People lie. Faces don't." That got his attention. He actually looked at her, really looked, not just the polite glance adults gave children before dismissing them. "How old are you?" 10. "How old are you?" Too old to be interrogated by a 10-year-old. "That's not a number." He did smile then, small, but real. 23. Liora did the math in her head. 13 years. That seemed manageable somehow. Not that she was entirely sure what she was managing toward, just that something in her chest had clicked into place when he smiled. "I'm going to marry you one day," she said. The words came out simple, certain, like announcing the sky was blue. Alaric stared at her, then he laughed. Not cruelly, but the way you laugh at a kitten trying to fight its reflection, amused, charmed, utterly unconvinced. "Are you now?" "Yes." "And what makes you think I'd marry you?" She considered this seriously. "I don't know yet, but I will." "Will what?" "Figure out what makes you say yes." His smile faded into something more complicated. He crouched down, bringing himself closer to her eye level. Up close, she could see the lines starting at the corners of his eyes. Could smell whatever expensive cologne Dukes wore. Something like cedar and smoke. "Listen, Liora," he said, voice gentler than before. "You seem like a clever girl, but marriage isn't something you decide at 10 years old. It's not a game." "I know that." "Do you?" "Yes. That's why I'm telling you now, so you'll remember." "Remember what?" "That I chose you first." Something flickered across his face, confusion, maybe, or the edge of discomfort. He stood back up, suddenly aware that they'd been talking too long. that people might notice. "You should return to wherever you're supposed to be," he said, not unkind, but final. "Before your parents worry. Will you remember?" "Remember what? This conversation?" "Me." He looked at her one more time. She met his eyes without flinching, without looking away, 10 years old and already too stubborn for her own good. "Sure," he said, in the tone of someone humoring a child. "I'll remember." He wouldn't, though, she could tell. By tomorrow she'd be just another blurry face from just another garden party. A weird kid who said weird things. That was fine. She'd make sure he remembered eventually. Liora watched him walk back toward the main house, his posture perfect, his expression already reset to that careful blankness. She stood by the fountain until her mother found her 20 minutes later and scolded her all the way home. That night, alone in her room, she wrote it down in the journal her father had given her for her birthday. June 14th, 1808. Met Duke Alaric Thornfield. Told him I'd marry him. He laughed. Will prove him wrong. She underlined the last sentence 3 times. The years that followed weren't kind. Leora's father died when she was 11, a fever that turned bad fast. Her mother remarried within a year to a merchant who barely tolerated his new stepdaughter. They moved from their small but comfortable home to a smaller, less comfortable one on the outskirts of a town nobody had heard of. Money got tight, then tighter. But Liora didn't forget. Couldn't forget, even when forgetting would have been easier. She read everything she could get her hands on, borrowed books from the local vicar, traded chores for lessons with the schoolmaster's wife. She learned French because she'd heard Duke Thornfield spoke it fluently, learned piano because nobility valued it, learned to dance by watching through windows at the assemblies she wasn't invited to, then practicing the steps alone in her room. "You're wasting your time," her stepfather said once, finding her awake past midnight with a book about parliamentary history. "Girls like you don't end up in those circles. Better to focus on practical skills." She'd smiled, nodded, kept reading. At 15, she started writing letters. Not to Alaric, she wasn't stupid, but to distant relatives, family friends, anyone with even a thread of connection to London society. She asked questions, gathered information, built a map of that world in her mind. Where did Duke Thornfield spend his time? What charities did he support? What kind of conversations did he have at dinner parties? Who were his close friends? What made him laugh? The answers came slowly. Most people thought she was just a curious girl with romantic notions. They answered indulgently, not realizing she was taking notes. Building a blueprint. She learned he rarely attended balls unless obligated, that he preferred intellectual salons to mindless socializing, that he'd rejected at least a dozen marriage proposals from perfectly suitable women, that his mother had died when he was young and his father had raised him with impossible standards. She learned he was kind to his staff, that he anonymously funded a school for poor children, that he once punched a lord for mistreating a servant. She learned he was lonely, even if he'd never admit it, that his detachment wasn't aristocratic snobbery. It was armor. At 17, she convinced her mother to let her work as a companion to an elderly lady in Bath. The pay was terrible, but the lady, Mrs. Ashworth, had connections, had been to London, had opinions about everyone. "Duke Thornfield?" Mrs. Ashworth said one afternoon when Liora carefully steered the conversation that direction. "Brilliant man? Tragic, really?" "Tragic how?" "He's trapped himself. Built walls so high he can't see over them anymore. Every woman who approaches him is after his title or his money, and he knows it, so he trusts no one, lets no one in." She sighed. "He'll die alone, that one, unless someone comes along who wants him for reasons he can't understand." Liora filed that away. At 18, she attended her first real society event, a small gathering at Mrs. Ashworth's nephew's estate. She wore a borrowed dress, spoke carefully, laughed at the right moments, studied how these people moved through the world. She was good at it, better than she expected. "You have excellent manners for someone so young," one lord commented. "Where did you say your family was from?" She smiled, gave a vague answer, changed the subject. By 19, she'd saved enough money, through work, through careful budgeting, through one small inheritance from a great-aunt she'd barely known, to afford a modest season in London. Not enough for a fancy house or elaborate gowns, but enough to exist in the same spaces as people who mattered. Her mother thought she was chasing fantasy. Her stepfather thought she was delusional. Neither of them understood. This wasn't about fantasy. It was about a promise she'd made to herself, about proving that a 10-year-old girl standing by a fountain hadn't been wrong. She spent that year preparing, not just practically, though she did that too, commissioning 3 well-made dresses instead of a dozen mediocre ones, learning the current gossip, memorizing who hated whom and why. But emotionally, she asked herself the hard questions. Was this real? Or had she built a shrine to a stranger? Did she actually know Alaric Thornfield, or just the idea of him? Could she walk away if the answer was wrong? She didn't know, but she knew she had to find out. On the eve of her 20th birthday, she sat in her small rented room in London and reread that journal entry from 10 years ago. Met Duke Alaric Thornfield. Told him I'd marry him. He laughed. We'll prove him wrong. Tomorrow, the season would begin. Tomorrow, she'd see him again. Not as a child, but as a woman. As someone he might actually notice. She closed the journal. All right, she whispered to the empty room. Let's see if I was right. The first ball of the 1818 season was held at the Pemberton estate, the same family whose scandal had distracted everyone 10 years ago. Liora arrived late, on purpose. Early arrivals looked desperate. Late arrivals looked confident. The dress she wore was deep emerald green, simple but well cut. No excessive jewelry, no feathers or ribbons, or any of the nonsense other girls were drowning themselves in. She'd learned that standing out didn't mean being loudest. It meant being different in the right way. She entered the ballroom, took a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking, and began her study. The room was exactly as she'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers, musicians in the corner playing something Viennese, women in pastel gowns clustered like flocks of nervous birds, men in dark coats pretending they weren't evaluating every woman in the room like livestock. And there, near the far wall, surrounded by a small group of older gentlemen in conversation, Alaric Thornfield. He looked almost exactly as she remembered, taller, maybe, the lines around his eyes deeper, but the same posture, the same expression of polite detachment. Her heart kicked against her ribs. She didn't approach him. That would be suicide, too obvious, too desperate. Instead, she positioned herself across the room and waited. It took 40 minutes. He glanced her direction once, then again. The third time, his eyes lingered just long enough that she knew he'd actually seen her. She didn't smile, didn't look away. Just met his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, then turned to listen to something the woman beside her was saying. Hook set. The rest of the evening, she carefully didn't look at him again. Danced with 2 perfectly acceptable gentlemen who bored her to tears. Had a conversation about the weather with a viscountess. Laughed at a terrible joke from someone's nephew, and felt Alaric's attention on her like heat. She left before midnight, early enough to suggest she had somewhere better to be, late enough that she'd been seen. The next morning, over breakfast at her lodgings, her landlady mentioned the gossip. There's talk about a young woman at the Pemberton ball, she said, pouring tea. No one knows quite who she is. The Vance girl, I think? Related to the Somerset Vances? Liora kept her expression neutral. Is there? Apparently Duke Thornfield asked about her. Her teacup paused halfway to her lips. Did he? Wanted to know her name, who her family was. Very unusual for him. He normally doesn't notice anyone. Liora set down the cup carefully. How interesting. Inside, her heart was screaming. He remembered, or he didn't. Either way, he noticed. Will you attend the Hamilton musicale tomorrow evening? Her landlady asked. I think I might. She did. And the dinner party Thursday. And the garden party Saturday. Each time she didn't approach Alaric, didn't contrive a meeting. Just existed in the same space, let him see her, let him wonder. She watched him too, studied how he'd changed. He was harder now, more controlled. The warmth he'd shown that 10-year-old girl, brief as it was, seemed gone. He spoke to people with perfect manners and 0 genuine interest, danced when required but looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Every woman in London wanted him. She watched them try, the flirtation, the carefully orchestrated accidental encounters, the deployment of accomplishments like weapons. He dodged them all with practiced ease. It was fascinating and sad. 2 weeks into the season, they finally spoke. It was at a salon hosted by Lady Whitmore, one of those intellectual gatherings where people pretended to care about art and philosophy while actually just positioning for social advantage. Liora had been invited because Mrs. Ashworth's nephew had mentioned her to Lady Whitmore, who was always looking for interesting young people to liven up her events. She arrived, took a seat near the back, and listened to a poet read something incomprehensible about nature and mortality. Alaric was there. Of course he was. These were exactly the kind of events he preferred. When the reading ended and people broke into smaller conversations, she stood to examine a painting on the far wall. It was terrible, some overblown allegory about Greek mythology, but she stared at it anyway. "I don't think staring harder will make it better," a voice said beside her. She didn't startle. She'd heard him approach. "I'm trying to find something redeeming about it," she said. "So far, I've failed." "The frame is nice." "The frame is the only nice thing." He almost smiled. She could feel it in the air between them. "We've met before," he said. Her stomach dropped. He remembered. "Have we?" "I'm sure of it, but I can't place where." Relief. He didn't remember. Not specifically. "Perhaps you're mistaken," she said lightly. "I'm easy to forget." "I don't think that's true." She turned to face him fully. Up close, she could see gray threading through his dark hair, could see the tiredness he hid well, but not perfectly. "Duke Thornfield," she said. "You know who I am." "Everyone knows who you are. But you didn't introduce yourself. You didn't ask." That got an actual smile. Small, but genuine. "What's your name?" "Liora Vance." He repeated it slowly, like testing how it felt. "Vance, are you related to the Somerset family?" "Distantly." "And what brings you to London, Miss Vance?" She could have said something safe, something expected. Instead, she met his eyes and told a version of the truth. "I came to see if a memory was real or if I'd imagined it." His expression shifted. Curiosity, confusion. "What memory?" "It doesn't matter. I'm still figuring out the answer." "That's cryptic." "Would you prefer I be straightforward?" "I'd prefer you be honest." "Those aren't always the same thing." He studied her, and she let him. Didn't perform, didn't posture, just stood there, a woman looking at a man, trying to decide if the person in front of her matched the one she'd built in her mind. "You're unusual," he said finally. "Is that a compliment?" "I'm not sure yet." "Then we're even. I'm not sure about you either." He blinked, then laughed, actually laughed, short and surprised. "No one talks to me like this." "Maybe they should." "Maybe." He paused. "Would you like to take a turn around the room? This painting is depressing me." "All right." They walked, slowly. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel the space between them like something physical. "How are you finding London?" he asked. "Loud, expensive, full of people pretending to be things they're not." "Accurate?" "You don't seem to enjoy it much." "I don't." "Then why stay? Duty, obligation, the usual aristocratic nonsense? That sounds exhausting." "It is." He glanced at her. "You don't talk like most women in society." "Most women in society are performing for an audience. I'm not interested in performing." "What are you interested in?" "You," she thought, but didn't say. "The truth," she said instead. "Whatever that turns out to be." They talked for 20 more minutes, about books they'd read, about the ridiculousness of current fashion, about whether the city or countryside was more tolerable. Nothing profound, nothing romantic, but honest, real in a way she suspected most of his conversations weren't. When they parted, because Lady Whitmore was calling everyone back for more poetry, he hesitated. "Will you be at the Henley Ball tomorrow?" "I might." "I hope you will." She smiled. "We'll see." She attended. So did he. And the pattern began. Over the next month, they kept finding themselves in the same spaces. sometimes by coincidence, sometimes because Liora had studied the social calendar and knew where he'd be. She never chased, never contrived a meeting too obviously, but she was there, present, available if he chose to approach. And he did. More and more. They'd talk. Actually talk, not the meaningless small talk that dominated most social interactions. He'd ask her opinion on things, seemed genuinely interested in her answers. She'd challenge him when he said something she disagreed with, watch surprise flicker across his face when she didn't back down. "You're not afraid of me," he said once, after she'd argued with him about some political matter. "Should I be?" "Most people are, or at least intimidated. You're just a man. An important one, maybe. But still, just a man." "Just a man," he repeated, like the phrase was foreign. "Isn't that what you want? For someone to see you that way?" He didn't answer, but something in his expression cracked open, just for a second. She didn't push, just let the moment exist, then move the conversation elsewhere. People started noticing. "The Vance girl has caught Duke Thornfield's attention," the gossip columns whispered. Could this be the match of the season? Liora ignored it. Alaric probably did too, but there was a problem. A complication she hadn't anticipated. Lord Edmund Carey. He was 26, handsome in a gentle way, with blonde hair and kind eyes. He worked in the Foreign Office, wrote poetry that was actually good, and had approached Liora at a garden party with zero pretense. "I find you fascinating," he'd said simply. "Would you like to take a walk?" She'd said yes because saying no seemed rude. The walk had been nice, easy. Edmund didn't play games, didn't posture. He asked about her life, listened when she answered, made her laugh with a dry sense of humor she hadn't expected. "I'm going to be honest," he said at the end of their walk. "I'd like to court you properly, if you're amenable." She should have said no. Should have explained she wasn't available emotionally, even if technically she was unattached. Instead, she hesitated. Because Edmund was good, uncomplicated. He liked her for reasons that made sense, because they had engaging conversations, because she was clever, because he enjoyed her company. Not because of some childhood promise, not because of a decade-long obsession. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course." He didn't push, didn't demand, just smiled and said he hoped she'd say yes. That night, alone in her room, Liora stared at the ceiling and wondered if she was insane. She had a good man interested in her, a straightforward man who'd make a good husband, who'd treat her well, who wasn't emotionally unavailable. And she was hesitating because of Alaric Thornfield, who hadn't made any declarations, who might not even see her as more than an interesting conversation partner. "What are you doing?" she whispered to herself. But she knew. She'd always known. She was waiting. Still, even after 10 years. The question was, how much longer? The turning point came at the Duchess of Marlborough's summer ball. Liora attended with Edmund as her escort. He'd asked politely. She'd agreed because refusing felt cruel. They arrived together, danced together, looked for all the world like a couple. Alaric was there. She saw him the moment she entered, and she saw him see her. Saw his expression shift when Edmund placed a hand on her lower back to guide her through the crowd. For the first time since she'd met him, Alaric Thornfield looked bothered. The evening progressed. She danced with Edmund twice, had a pleasant conversation with his mother, who clearly approved of her, smiled, laughed at appropriate moments, and felt Alaric watching the entire time. It was almost midnight when he finally approached. Edmund had gone to get refreshments. She was standing alone near the terrace doors, taking a moment to breathe. "You look happy," Alaric said, appearing beside her. "Do I?" "Lord Carey seems to make you happy. He's kind." That's not an answer. She turned to face him. He looked almost angry, as close to it as she'd ever seen him. "What do you want me to say?" she asked. "I don't know. The truth, maybe. The truth is, Edmund is a good man who treats me well and wants to marry me." Something flickered in Alaric's eyes. "He's proposed?" "Not yet, but he will." "And will you say yes?" She should have said she didn't know, should have been coy, mysterious. Instead, she was tired. Tired of waiting, tired of games. "Why do you care?" she asked quietly. I... He stopped, looked away. I don't know. Yes, you do. Miss Vance, Liora. After a month of conversations, you can call me by my first name. Liora. He said it carefully, like it meant something. I'm not good at this. At what? This. Whatever this is. What do you think it is? He met her eyes. For the first time since she'd known him, both as a child and now, he looked genuinely uncertain. I think, he said slowly, that you're the first person in a very long time who I actually want to talk to, who I look for in rooms, who makes me feel like... He trailed off. Like what? Like I'm not alone. Her heart cracked open. Alaric, she said softly. But I don't know what to do with that, he continued. I don't know how to be anything other than what I am. And what I am is insufficient for someone like you. Someone like me? Someone real. Someone who deserves more than a man who's forgotten how to feel anything beyond duty. She wanted to tell him everything, wanted to say she'd been choosing him since she was 10 years old, that she'd spent a decade preparing for this exact moment. But the words stuck. Because what if he didn't want that? What if the weight of it crushed whatever fragile thing was building between them? You're not insufficient, she said instead. You're scared. I'm not. Yes, you are. And that's fine. But don't hide behind self-deprecation and call it honesty. He stared at her, then, impossibly, smiled. You don't let me get away with anything, do you? No. It's terrifying. Good. They stood there inches apart, the sounds of the ball muffled behind them. I should go, she said finally. Edmund will wonder where I am. Will you marry him? I don't know yet. But you might. I might. Liora. Figure out what you want, Alaric, then tell me, because I'm not going to wait forever. She walked away before he could respond, before she could see whether her words landed or bounced off the armor he wore so well. Edmund found her a few minutes later, handed her a glass of lemonade, asked if she was all right. I'm fine, she lied. You don't look fine. Just tired. He studied her with those kind eyes, and she wondered if he knew, if he could tell her heart was somewhere else entirely. Whenever you're ready to talk about it, he said quietly. I'm here, she almost cried. 'Cause Edmund deserved better than this. Better than a woman who was choosing between him and a man who might never choose her back. That night, she made a decision. She'd give Alaric 2 more weeks. If he couldn't figure out what he wanted in 2 weeks, she'd accept Edmund's inevitable proposal. She'd spent 10 years waiting. She couldn't spend the rest of her life doing the same. The clock was ticking. And for the first time since she was 10 years old, Liora Vance wasn't sure how this story would end. The 2 weeks passed like water through her fingers. Liora counted every day, every interaction, every moment Alaric had the opportunity to say something, anything, that would change the trajectory of what was coming. He didn't. Oh, he was present. More present than before, actually. He sought her out at every event, their conversations growing longer, more intimate. He looked at her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. Like if he just studied her long enough, he'd understand what made her different from everyone else. But he never said the words that mattered. And Edmund did. It was day 13 when Edmund asked her to walk with him in Hyde Park. The weather was perfect, too perfect, like the universe was conspiring to make this moment as beautiful as possible, which felt deeply unfair. They walked in silence for a while, past nurses with children, past couples strolling arm in arm. Edmund's hands were clasped behind his back, his expression thoughtful. You're going to say no, he said finally. Liora stopped walking. What? To my proposal, which I haven't made yet, but was planning to make today. You're going to say no. Her throat tightened. Edmund, it's all right. He turned to face her, and his smile was sad but genuine. I've known for weeks, I think. Maybe since the beginning. You were never really here, were you? That's not fair to you. You deserved someone whose heart wasn't already given away. He shrugged. Perhaps, but I got something valuable anyway. What? Your honesty. Even when you didn't speak it out loud, I could see it. You never pretended to feel something you didn't. That's rarer than you'd think. She felt tears prick her eyes. I wish I could hold... Don't. He held up a hand. Don't wish you felt differently. That would be a lie, and you've never lied to me. I'm sorry. I'm not. Well, I am. But I'm also grateful I met you. He paused. Whoever he is, I hope he's worth it. I don't know if he is yet, but you need to find out. Yes. Edmund nodded slowly. Then I hope you get your answer, one way or another. They parted as friends, or as close to friends as two people could be when one had wanted more and the other couldn't give it. Liora walked home alone, feeling simultaneously relieved and devastated. One deadline met, one safety net removed. Now there was only Alaric, and whatever courage she could scrape together. That night she pulled out the journal again, reread that entry from 10 years ago. Then she wrote a new one. Tomorrow, I stop waiting. Tomorrow, I take control. She underlined it once. That was enough. The next morning, she sent a note to Alaric's residence. Short, direct. I need to speak with you privately. Not at a ball or salon. Somewhere we can have an actual conversation. Tomorrow afternoon, the gardens at Thornfield House, if you're willing. She sealed it before she could second-guess the wording. His response came 3 hours later. 2 o'clock. I'll have the staff ensure privacy. That was it. No questions. No hesitation. She spent the next 24 hours oscillating between calm determination and absolute panic. She rehearsed what she'd say, then decided rehearsing was stupid and she'd speak from the heart, then panicked that speaking from the heart would make her sound insane. By the time she arrived at Thornfield House the next afternoon, she'd changed her dress 3 times and rewritten her opening line 16 different ways. The butler let her in without comment, led her through the house and out to the back gardens. They were different from how she remembered, more mature, the hedges taller, the flower beds more established, but still beautiful. Still the place where a 10-year-old girl had made a promise to a man who'd laughed. Alaric was waiting near the same fountain. He stood when he saw her, and she almost laughed at the symmetry. Miss Vance, he said. Liora. Liora. He gestured to the bench beside him. Please. She sat. He sat. For a moment, neither spoke. You wanted to talk, he said finally. Yes. About? She took a breath. This was it. No more waiting, no more strategy. 10 years ago, she said, I stood in these gardens and told you I was going to marry you. He went completely still. What? I was 10. You were 23. I said I'd marry you one day, and you laughed. You told me marriage wasn't something children decided. Then you walked away and forgot about me. His face had gone pale. That was... you? Yes. I don't... He stopped. Started again. I barely remember that. A girl at a party, I thought, but... I know. You weren't supposed to remember. I was just another child saying something ridiculous. Why are you telling me this now? Because I need you to understand something. She turned to face him fully. I didn't forget. Not for one day in 10 years. I spent a decade preparing myself. Learning French because you spoke it. Reading philosophy because you valued it. Studying society because I needed to exist in your world. Every single choice I made was aimed at this moment. He looked at her like she'd grown a second head. That's... Liora, that's not normal. I know. That's obsession. Maybe. Or maybe it's commitment. To what? A stranger? To finding out if what I felt was real. She leaned forward. And that's why I'm here. I need to know the truth. Was it real? This thing I've been chasing, does it actually exist? Or did I build a fantasy around a stranger and waste 10 years of my life? I don't know how to answer that. Yes, you do, because you feel something too. I know you do. I've seen it in the way you look at me, the way you seek me out, the way you talk to me differently than you talk to anyone else. Liora, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me this past month has been nothing, that you haven't felt anything. He stood abruptly, paced away from her. His hands were shaking. This is insane, he muttered. Yes. You don't know me. Not really. I know you better than anyone else in London. I've been studying you for 10 years. He spun around. That should terrify me. Does it? Yes. And no. And I don't know. He dragged a hand through his hair. You show up in my life and suddenly everything is, I can't think straight around you. Can't maintain the distance I've spent years building. You just walk in and dismantle everything like it's nothing. It's not nothing. It's everything. That's the problem. His voice rose. It's too much, too fast. I don't know how to, can't what? Feel something? Want something? Yes. The word hung in the air between them. Liora stood, walked closer. He didn't back away. Why not? She asked softly. Because everyone wants something from me. My title, my money, my influence. I'm never a person. I'm a prize, a commodity. I don't want your title. Then what do you want? You. Just you. The man who punches lords for mistreating servants, who funds schools anonymously because he actually cares, not for recognition. Who looks sad at parties because he's lonely but won't admit it. That's who I want. You can't know that from studying me. Then prove me wrong. Show me I'm mistaken. Show me there's nothing here worth fighting for. He stared at her. His jaw worked like he was trying to find words. I can't, he said finally. Can't show me or can't prove me wrong. Both, neither. I don't. He closed his eyes. You terrify me. Good. You terrify me too. How? Because if this isn't real, I've wasted 10 years. And if it is real, and you can't let yourself feel it, I've still lost. He opened his eyes. What are you asking me? Here it was, the moment everything had been building toward. I'm asking you to choose, she said. Me, us, whatever this could be. I'm asking you to take a risk on something that doesn't make sense on paper but feels true anyway. And if I can't, then I'll walk away. For real this time. No more conversations, no more wondering. I'll let you go. To marry Lord Carey? That's over. I ended it. Surprise flashed across his face. Why? Because it wasn't fair to him. He deserves someone who isn't in love with someone else. Alaric's breath caught. You're in love with me. I don't know yet. Maybe. Or maybe I'm in love with the idea of you. That's what I'm trying to figure out. By giving me an ultimatum. Yes. That's not how people don't just... He shook his head. You can't demand someone fall in love with you. I'm not demanding you fall in love with me. I'm demanding you be honest about whether you already have. The silence that followed was suffocating. Alaric looked at her like she was a storm he didn't know how to weather, like she was the most terrifying thing he'd ever encountered. I need time, he said finally. How much time? I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Liora felt something crack in her chest. She'd known this was possible, had prepared for it, but it still hurt. All right, she said quietly. All right? You need time. I understand. Relief flooded his face. Thank you, I just need to think. You have until the end of the season. The relief vanished. What? The season ends in 6 weeks. You have until then to decide. After that, I'm leaving London, with or without an answer from you. 6 weeks is more than enough time to figure out if you want someone. I've given you 10 years already. I'm not giving you more. Liora, you can't just... Yes, I can. This is my life too, Alaric. I've put it on hold long enough. She stepped back. 6 weeks, then I'm done waiting. She turned to leave. Wait. She paused but didn't turn around. This isn't fair, he said, and his voice was raw. No, she agreed. It's not. But neither is asking me to wait indefinitely while you figure out if I'm worth the risk. She walked away. Through the gardens, through the house, past the butler who politely didn't react to the tears streaming down her face. She'd done it. She'd laid everything bare. Given him the choice she'd promised herself she'd give him. Now it was up to him. And she had no idea which way it would go. The next 3 weeks were torture. Alaric attended fewer events. When he did appear, he looked like he wasn't sleeping. Their eyes would meet across rooms and she'd see the conflict written all over his face, want warring with fear, desire fighting self-preservation. They didn't speak. She'd said what needed saying. Anything more would be pleading, and she'd promised herself she wouldn't beg. But the waiting was killing her. Society noticed. Of course they did. The gossip columns had a field day. Duke Thornfield and Miss Vance appear to have had a falling out. Lord Carey is conveniently absent from the season. Could there be a connection? Stay tuned, dear readers. Liora ignored it. She attended parties, had conversations, pretended everything was fine. Inside, she was counting down days like a prisoner awaiting execution. 3 weeks became 4. 4 became 5. Still nothing. With 1 week left in the season, Liora began to accept the truth. He wasn't going to choose her. He was too scared, too damaged, too locked in his fortress of emotional self-preservation. She'd gambled everything and lost. The realization hurt worse than she'd expected. She'd known it was possible, had prepared for it. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were different things. She started making plans. She'd leave London, maybe return to Bath, maybe somewhere new entirely, start over. Figure out who Liora Vance was when she wasn't defined by wanting Alaric Thornfield. It would be fine. She'd survive. That's what she told herself anyway. The final ball of the season was hosted by the Duchess of Richmond. Everyone who mattered would be there. One last gasp of social performance before everyone scattered to country estates for the summer. Liora almost didn't attend. What was the point? But staying home felt like admitting defeat, so she put on her best dress, deep midnight blue that made her eyes look darker, and went. The ballroom was packed. Music, laughter, champagne flowing freely. People already nostalgic for a season that hadn't quite ended yet. She danced with a few partners, had a conversation with Lady Whitmore about books, drank half a glass of wine and felt it go straight to her head. She was standing near the terrace doors, contemplating leaving early when the music stopped. Not naturally. Someone had stopped it. The room fell silent. Everyone turned toward the musician's platform. Alaric stood there. Leora's heart stopped. He looked terrible, disheveled in a way she'd never seen him, hair slightly messed, cravat loose, eyes wild, like he'd come straight here from somewhere else without bothering to compose himself. "Forgive the interruption," he said, and his voice carried across the silent ballroom. "I need to say something, and if I don't say it now, I'll lose my nerve." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was unprecedented. Dukes didn't interrupt balls, didn't make public spectacles. Alaric's eyes found Liora across the room. 10 years ago, he said, a girl told me she was going to marry me. I laughed, thought it was charming, forgot about it by morning. Liora couldn't breathe. 3 weeks ago, that girl, now a woman, told me she'd spent a decade preparing for me, that she'd built her entire life around the possibility of us, and she asked me to choose. The room was so quiet you could hear fabric rustling as people shifted to see better. I thought she was insane, Alaric continued. I thought obsession couldn't be love, that what she was describing was fantasy, not reality. Leora's hands were shaking. I was wrong. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Because I've spent 6 weeks trying to convince myself I don't feel what I feel, trying to logic my way out of something that doesn't make logical sense, and I failed. His voice cracked. I failed because the only thing I know for certain is that every room feels empty if she's not in it. Every conversation feels meaningless if it's not with her. And the thought of her leaving London, leaving my life, is unbearable. He stepped down from the platform, started walking toward her. The crowd parted automatically. I don't know if this is love, he said, closer now. I don't know if I'm doing this right. I've never done this before. Let someone in, wanted someone to stay, been terrified and certain at the same time. He stopped in front of her. Up close, she could see his eyes were red-rimmed, could see the desperation written across every feature. But I'm choosing you, he said quietly, just for her now. I'm choosing risk over safety, feeling over numbness, you over everyone else. Leora's vision blurred with tears. Alaric, I'm sorry it took me so long. I'm sorry I'm doing this in front of 300 people instead of privately, like a sane person. I couldn't let you leave without knowing. Knowing what? That you were right. 10 years ago, when you made that promise. You were right. The tears spilled over. She didn't bother wiping them away. You're choosing me, she repeated, like she needed to hear it again to believe it. Yes, if you'll still have me. If I haven't waited too long. If She kissed him, right there, in the middle of the Duchess of Richmond's ballroom, in front of half of London society. Kissed him like she'd been wanting to for 10 years. Like he was air and she'd been drowning. He kissed her back, fierce and desperate and real. When they broke apart, the room erupted. Applause, gasps, scandalized whispers. Liora didn't care about any of it. "I'll have you," she whispered against his mouth. "I've been having you since I was 10 years old." He laughed, actually laughed, joy breaking through the fear, and pulled her close. "Marry me," he said. "Not someday, soon, tomorrow, if possible." Tomorrow might be rushing it. Next week? We'll see. Liora. Yes? I love you. I think I've loved you since you called me sad in my own garden. I just didn't know it yet. Fresh tears fell. I love you too, the real you, not the fantasy version. Even though I'm emotionally stunted and terrible at this, especially because of that. He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise instead of desperation. Around them, London society watched and whispered and would talk about nothing else for months. Neither of them noticed, because the wait was over, the gamble had paid off, and standing there, in his arms, Liora Vance finally understood what she'd been chasing all these years. Not a fantasy, not an obsession, just love. Complicated and terrifying and absolutely real. Just love. Complicated and terrifying and absolutely real. The applause faded eventually, the whispers grew louder, and reality crashed back in with the weight of 300 pairs of eyes watching their every move. Alaric pulled back first, his hand still cupped against her cheek. We should probably leave before the Duchess has us thrown out for creating a scandal. Probably. Liora didn't move. Couldn't, really. Her legs felt unstable. Can you walk? Give me a moment. I'm still processing the fact that you just declared yourself in front of half of London. I'm still processing it too. He looked slightly dazed, like he couldn't quite believe what he'd done. That was insane. Completely. I don't do things like that. I know. Everyone's staring. Let them. He laughed, short and breathless, then offered his arm. Shall we? They walked through the ballroom together. People parted automatically, some smiling, others looking scandalized, most just shocked into silence. The Duchess herself stood near the entrance, and Liora braced for a scolding. Instead, the older woman smiled. Well, that was certainly memorable. My apologies for the disruption, Alaric said. Don't apologize. I haven't seen anything that interesting in years. She winked at Liora. Hold on to that one, dear. Men who make grand gestures are rare. They escaped into the night air. Alaric's carriage was waiting, because of course it was. He probably had standing instructions for his driver to always be ready. Inside, with the door closed and the carriage moving, silence fell. So, Liora said. So, what happens now? Alaric ran a hand through his hair. I have no idea. I didn't plan past the declaration. You didn't have a plan? My plan was tell her before she leaves London. Everything after that is uncharted territory. She laughed, and it came out slightly hysterical. The great Duke Thornfield, unprepared. Terrified is more accurate. He looked at her, really looked, and his expression was raw. I meant what I said, all of it, but I have no idea how to do this. Do what? Be in love. Be with someone. I've spent 15 years avoiding exactly this. Why? The question hung between them. Outside, London rolled past, gaslights casting shadows, the rumble of other carriages, the distant sound of the city that never quite slept. My father, Alaric said finally, he loved my mother completely. When she died, it destroyed him. He was never the same. I watched him become a shell of himself, just going through motions, and I promised myself I'd never let that happen to me. So you chose loneliness instead. I chose safety, or so I thought. He shook his head. Turns out safety is just another word for cowardice. You're not a coward. I've been running from you for 6 weeks. That's pretty cowardly. You stopped running, only because you forced me to. Good, someone needed to. He reached for her hand, laced their fingers together. His palm was warm, slightly calloused, real. "What if I'm terrible at this?" he asked quietly. "At what?" "Being what you need, being enough." "What if you are enough? What if I'm the one who isn't?" He blinked. "That's ridiculous. You're human, flawed, possibly obsessive to an unhealthy degree." "I was going to say extraordinary. I spent 10 years fixating on you. That's not extraordinary, that's concerning. Or determined. There's a fine line." "Maybe." He squeezed her hand. "But you were right about one thing. What you felt, it was real. I feel it too." The carriage stopped. Liora looked out the window and recognized her lodgings. "I should go in," she said, not moving. "Yes." Neither of them let go. "Alaric? What happens tomorrow?" "Tomorrow I'll come by. We'll talk. Figure out the practical things. When to marry, where to live, how to handle the inevitable gossip storm." "That sounds very organized." I'm good at organized. It's emotions I struggle with." "Then it's fortunate you have me," he smiled. "Very fortunate." She leaned in, kissed him once more, soft and brief and full of promise. "Good night, Alaric." "Good night, Liora." She climbed out of the carriage, walked to her door, turned back. He was watching through the window, looking lost and hopeful and scared all at once. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow they'd figure it out. Tonight, she'd just let herself feel happy. But happiness, she was about to learn, came with complications. The next morning started with a knock on her door at an ungodly hour. Liora stumbled out of bed, wrapped a robe around herself, and opened it to find her landlady looking concerned. "There's a woman downstairs demanding to see you," she said. "Lady something, wouldn't give her full name, very insistent." Liora's stomach dropped. "What does she look like?" "Older, well-dressed. Has that look aristocrats get when they're about to ruin your day." 10 minutes later, Liora sat across from Lady Margaret Thornfield, Alaric's aunt, his only living family besides some distant cousins, in the small sitting room of her lodgings. The older woman studied her with ice-blue eyes that reminded Liora uncomfortably of Alaric's. "So," Lady Margaret said, "you're the girl who caused such a scene last night." "I didn't cause it. Your nephew did." "Because of you?" "Yes." 10 years of planning, I heard. Is that true?" Liora met her gaze steadily. "Yes. That's disturbing. Or committed." "There's a difference between commitment and obsession, girl." "My name is Liora." Lady Margaret's eyebrow arched. "You have spine. Good. You'll need it." "For what?" "For what's coming. You think last night was the hard part? That was easy. The declaration, the romance, children's games. Now comes the real work." "Which is?" "Marriage to Alaric Thornfield means marriage to everything he represents. His title, his estates, his responsibilities. Can you manage a household of 40 servants? Navigate political dinners where one wrong word could damage important alliances? Produce heirs while maintaining dignity through pregnancy and childbirth in the public eye?" Liora's throat tightened. She hadn't thought about any of that. Had been so focused on getting Alaric to choose her that she'd barely considered what came after. "I can learn," she said. "Learning isn't enough. You'll be scrutinized constantly. Every dress, every word, every friendship analyzed and judged. They'll call you a fortune hunter, an upstart. They'll whisper that you trapped him with some kind of scheme. Let them whisper. You say that now. Wait until it's relentless. Wait until other women who wanted him turn vicious. Wait until you realize you've entered a world that will never fully accept you." "Why are you here?" Liora asked. "To scare me off? To make me doubt?" Lady Margaret leaned back. "I'm here because Alaric is my nephew, and I love him. I watched his father destroy himself with grief, watched Alaric lock himself away to avoid the same fate. Last night was the first time in 15 years I've seen him look alive." "Then what's the problem?" "The problem is whether you're strong enough for what you've chosen, whether you understand what you're walking into. I understand perfectly, and I'm not walking away. Even if it gets ugly?" "Even then." They stared at each other. some silent battle of wills that Liora refused to lose. Finally, Lady Margaret smiled, small but genuine. Good, because it will get ugly, and you'll need to be ready. She stood, preparing to leave. At the door, she paused. One more thing. Alaric has spent years building walls. You've gotten past them, which is impressive, but those walls exist for a reason. When he's scared, he'll retreat. When things get hard, he'll shut down. Don't let him. I won't. And don't try to be perfect. He doesn't need perfect. He needs real. I can do real. Then you might actually survive this. Lady Margaret nodded once. Welcome to the family, Liora Vance. May you prove worthy of the chaos you've created. She left. Liora sat in the empty room, hands shaking, and realized she might have been preparing for the wrong battle all along. Getting Alaric had been hard. Keeping him, and keeping herself intact in the process, might be harder. Alaric arrived 2 hours later looking slightly more composed than the night before. He'd clearly slept, or tried to, and his cravat was properly tied this time. Your aunt came by, Liora said instead of greeting him. He froze. Margaret was here? This morning. She wanted to make sure I understood what I was getting into. What did she say? That everyone will hate me, that I'll be scrutinized constantly, and that you'll retreat into yourself when things get difficult. Alaric closed his eyes. I'm going to kill her. She's not wrong, though, is she? No, but she didn't need to. I was going to explain all of that. Were you? He looked uncomfortable. Eventually. When? After we were already married? I was trying to find the right moment. There is no right moment for, by the way, marrying me will make your life significantly harder. She crossed her arms. What else haven't you told me? Liora, I spent 10 years preparing for you, for this. The least you can do is be honest about what it actually means. He sank into a chair, looking suddenly exhausted. You're right. I'm sorry. I got caught up in the romance of last night and forgot about the reality. So tell me the reality. He did. All of it. The estates that needed managing, 3 major properties plus several smaller holdings. The political obligations, the social expectations, the fact that as a duchess she'd be expected to host, to be seen, to represent the Thornfield name with grace and dignity. There's also my mother's family, he said, the Ashfords. They've never approved of me. They'll definitely not approve of you. Why not? Because you're not titled, not wealthy, not one of them. They'll make things difficult. How difficult? Depends on how vindictive they're feeling. Could range from cold shoulders at parties to actively trying to undermine our marriage. Liora felt the weight of it settling onto her shoulders. This was real. Not a fantasy, not a romance, a life with actual consequences. Are you having second thoughts? Alaric asked quietly. No. Are you? Constantly. She almost laughed. Well, at least we're honest. I don't want you walking into this blind, Liora. I don't want you 5 years from now resenting me because society turned vicious and you weren't prepared. I can handle vicious. Can you handle people you thought were friends turning on you? Can you handle newspapers printing lies about your character? Can you handle being vulnerable? She interrupted. Can you handle letting someone see you scared? Can you handle not being in control all the time? He stared at her. That's not the same thing. Yes, it is. We're both walking into unknown territory, both scared, both risking something. What are you risking? Everything. My identity, my independence, the person I've been for 20 years. I'll become the Duchess, and Liora Vance will disappear. You don't have to disappear. Don't I? Your aunt said I need to learn to manage households and navigate politics and produce heirs. When exactly do I get to be myself? Alaric stood, crossed to her, took her hands in his. Listen to me. I don't want you to disappear. I don't want some perfect duchess who knows all the rules. I want you. The woman who called me sad in my own garden, who gave me an ultimatum because she was tired of waiting, who isn't afraid to challenge me. That woman might not fit into your world. Then we'll change the world. Together. You make it sound simple. It won't be simple. It'll probably be a disaster, but I'd rather have a disaster with you than perfection with anyone else. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that love was enough to overcome everything else. But Lady Margaret's words echoed. When things get hard, he'll shut down. Promise me something, she said. Anything. When you get scared, and you will get scared, don't run. Don't retreat into that fortress you've built. Talk to me instead. I'm not good at talking about feelings. I know. Do it anyway. He nodded slowly. All right. But you have to promise something too. What? When society turns cruel, and it will, don't try to handle it alone. Let me help. Let me fight with you. Deal. They sealed it with a kiss. It felt like a contract and a promise and a leap of faith all at once. Over the next week, they fell into a routine. Alaric would visit in the mornings, they'd walk or talk or just exist in each other's presence. He taught her things about his world, which families held real power versus which just had titles, how to read the social hierarchy, what topics were safe and which were landmines. She taught him things too, how to laugh without calculating whether it was appropriate, how to be present instead of observing from a distance, how to want something without immediately listing all the reasons it could go wrong. They set a date, 6 weeks away, enough time to arrange a proper wedding, but not so long that they'd lose momentum. Everything seemed to be falling into place. Then the letter arrived. Liora was alone when the messenger delivered it. Heavy paper, expensive seal. She opened it without thinking. Miss Vance, you do not know me, but I know everything about you. Your father's debts before he died, your mother's desperate remarriage, your years of scheming to trap a man far above your station. Duke Thornfield is a good man being led astray by a clever fortune hunter. I will not allow it to continue. Withdraw from this engagement quietly, or I will ensure that every sordid detail of your past becomes public knowledge. Your mother's second husband's gambling debts, the money you borrowed and never repaid, the lies you told to gain entrance to society. You have 3 days to decide. Choose wisely. A friend of the family. Liora's hands shook. Some of it was lies. She'd never borrowed money she didn't repay. Her stepfather's gambling was news to her. But some of it was true enough to be damaging, and the implication was clear. Someone was willing to destroy her reputation to stop this marriage. She should have shown Alaric immediately, should have told him everything. Instead, she folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her desk drawer. Because part of her, the part that had spent 10 years fighting for this, wondered if maybe they were right, if maybe she was selfish for dragging Alaric into a scandal, if maybe loving him meant letting him go before she ruined him. That night, Alaric noticed something was wrong. "You're quiet," he said over dinner at his house. They'd started eating together most evenings, chaperoned by his housekeeper for propriety's sake. "Just tired." "Liar, what's wrong?" "Nothing." "Liora." She set down her fork. "Do you ever wonder if we're making a mistake?" His expression shuddered. "What kind of question is that?" "An honest one, do you?" "Where's this coming from?" "Just answer." He was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if I'm being selfish, if I'm pulling you into something that will hurt you. And then I remember that I'd rather face that possibility than live without you." He leaned forward. "Now tell me what's really going on." She almost told him, almost pulled out the letter and showed him everything. But fear locked the words in her throat. Fear that he'd see her as a problem to solve. Fear that this would be the thing that made him retreat. Fear that she'd lose him right when she'd finally won him. "I'm just nervous," she said instead. "About the wedding. About everything changing." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Alaric studied her, and she could see him trying to decide whether to push. Finally, he nodded. "We can slow down if you need to. Postpone the wedding. Take more time." "No, I don't want to slow down." "Then what do you want?" "You. Just you, no matter what it costs." "I want you to trust me," she said. "I do trust you. Even when I'm not perfect? Even when I make mistakes?" "Especially then." He reached across the table, took her hand. "Liora, whatever's wrong, we can handle it together. That's what we promised." She squeezed his hand, feeling the weight of the letter burning in her mind. "I know," she whispered. But she didn't tell him. Not that night. not the next day. 3 days passed. On the morning of the fourth day, the newspapers exploded. Scandal. Duke Thornfield's bride-to-be exposed as fortune hunter. Mysterious past of Miss Vance revealed. Documents. Show history of deception and debt. The articles were everywhere. Every paper, every gossip column. Some were just speculation, but others had details. Carefully selected truths twisted into damning narratives. Her father's debts, portrayed as evidence of bad character. Her mother's remarriage, painted as desperate social climbing. Her years studying Alaric, described as stalking. The worst part was the supposed evidence. Letters she'd written asking about Alaric, taken out of context and presented as proof of manipulation. Testimony from people she barely knew, claiming she'd bragged about trapping a duke. It was a coordinated attack. Professional. Devastating. Liora sat in her lodgings, surrounded by newspapers, and felt her world crumbling. A knock on the door. She didn't answer. "Liora," Alaric's voice. "Open the door." She didn't move. "I know you're in there. I saw the papers. We need to talk." Still nothing. "Please, let me in." The desperation in his voice finally made her stand. She opened the door. He looked worse than she felt. Hair disheveled, eyes wild, jaw tight with barely controlled fury. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. "Tell you what?" "That someone threatened you. Don't pretend you didn't know this was coming. How did you—" "Because I know how these things work. Someone doesn't launch an attack this coordinated without warning. They gave you a chance to back out quietly, didn't they?" She said nothing, which was answer enough. "Damn it, Liora!" He pushed past her into the room, spun around. "We promised. No secrets, no handling things alone. And the first real test of that, you hide it from me? I didn't want to burden you, Burden me? You're not a burden. You're the woman I'm going to marry. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You trying to protect me instead of trusting me. I do trust you. No, you don't. Because if you did, you would have shown me that letter the second you received it. We could have prepared, could have gotten ahead of this. Instead, you let them ambush us." "I was scared." "Of what?" "Of this." She gestured wildly at the newspapers. "Of dragging you into a scandal, of proving everyone right that I'm not good enough for you." "That's not your decision to make," his voice cracked. "I chose you knowing there would be consequences. I chose you knowing people would attack. But I can't protect you if you won't let me in." They stared at each other, both breathing hard, both too angry and scared to think clearly. "I'm sorry," Liora whispered finally. "You're right. I should have told you." Some of the fury drained from his face. "Yes, you should have." "So what do we do now?" "Now? Now I have my investigators trace who's behind this. Now we issue a statement. Now we fight back. It might get worse before it gets better. I know. Society might turn on you too, for defending me. I don't care. Your family can accept it or not. Their choice." He crossed to her, cupped her face in his hands. "Listen to me. I am not running. I am not backing down. And I am not letting anyone destroy you to get to me. Understand?" She nodded, tears spilling over. "But you have to let me in," he continued. "All the way. No more protecting me. No more secrets. If we're doing this, we're doing it together. All of it. The good and the ugly." "Okay. Say it properly." "I promise. No more secrets. No more trying to handle things alone." He kissed her, hard and desperate and claiming. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. "We're going to get through this," he said. "How can you be sure?" "Because I didn't spend 10 years being miserable just to give up now, and neither did you." She laughed, watery and broken. "We're a mess." "We really are. But we're a mess together." "Exactly." He held her while she cried, held her while the fear and shame and relief poured out, didn't let go until she was empty. Then they got to work. Over the next week, Alaric's investigators uncovered the truth. The letters had come from Lord Edmund Ashford, a distant cousin of Alaric's mother's family who'd expected to inherit if Alaric died without an heir. He'd orchestrated everything. The letters, the newspaper articles, the supposed witnesses. All of it designed to destroy Liora's reputation and force Alaric to end the engagement. When confronted, Edmund didn't even deny it. "You're making a mistake," he told Alaric coldly. "That woman is beneath you. I was trying to save you from yourself." By destroying an innocent woman's reputation? By protecting the Thornfield name from contamination. Alaric had punched him. Broken his nose, probably. Liora found out later from the housekeeper who'd witnessed it. "Was it worth it?" she asked him that evening, tending to his bruised knuckles. "Completely. You shouldn't have hit him. He called you contamination. I showed remarkable restraint by only hitting him once." Despite everything, she smiled. But the damage was done. The newspapers had printed their poison. Society had swallowed it. And even with the truth exposed, the stain remained. Invitations stopped coming. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Women who'd smiled at her last week now whispered behind fans when she passed. It was exactly as brutal as Lady Margaret had warned. 2 weeks before the wedding, Liora stood in Alaric's study and said the words she'd been dreading. "Maybe we should postpone." He looked up from the papers he'd been reviewing. "No. Alaric, no, we're not giving them that victory. I'm not talking about giving them anything. I'm talking about letting things calm down before what? Before you're accepted? That might never happen, Liora. Some people will never accept you regardless of what we do." "Then why put yourself through this?" "Because I love you, because you're worth it, because I'm not letting fear dictate my life anymore." "This isn't about fear, isn't it?" He stood, walked around the desk. "You're scared." "I'm scared. But postponing won't change anything. It'll just show everyone that they can control us with gossip and lies." "So what's your solution? Pretend everything's fine?" "No. Acknowledge it's terrible and do it anyway." She stared at him. "That's insane." "Probably. But so is marrying a man who laughed at you 10 years ago. Insane seems to be our specialty." Despite herself, she laughed. "We really are disasters." "The best kind." He pulled her close. 2 more weeks. Then you're stuck with me forever. Still want to go through with it?" She thought about everything that had happened. The attacks, the scandal, the cruelty of people she'd thought were friends. She thought about Edmund Carey's kindness, the safe life she could have had if she'd chosen differently. She thought about standing in a garden at 10 years old, making a promise to a stranger. "Yes," she said, "I still want to go through with it. Even knowing it'll be hard. Especially knowing that." He kissed her, slow and thorough and full of certainty. The day before the wedding, one final blow landed. Lady Margaret arrived at Liora's lodgings with news. "The Ashford family is threatening to boycott the wedding," she said without preamble. "All of them. They're trying to pressure Alaric into calling it off." Liora's stomach sank. "All of them?" 30 people, most of his mother's side of the family. What did Alaric say? That they can attend or not, it's their choice. But the wedding is happening either way. This will cause a permanent rift. Likely. He'll lose half his family because of me. Lady Margaret gave her a long look. He'll lose half his family because they're small-minded fools who value appearances over happiness. Don't take that burden on yourself. How can I not? Because Alaric is a grown man making his own choice. You didn't force him into this. You gave him the option to walk away. He chose to stay. He's sacrificing too much. Then be worth it. The words hit like a slap. Excuse me? You heard me. If he's sacrificing his family, his social standing, his easy life, then be worth it. Don't waste the gift he's giving you by drowning in guilt. Use it. Build something together that proves every sacrifice was worthwhile. Liora stared at her. I thought you came to warn me off. I came to test you, to see if you'd crumble under pressure. Lady Margaret smiled slightly. You haven't, which means you might actually survive this marriage after all. Might? Nothing's guaranteed, girl, but you've got spine. That's more than most duchesses start with. After she left, Liora sat alone and let the weight of it settle. Tomorrow, she'd marry Alaric Thornfield. Tomorrow, she'd become a duchess. Tomorrow, her entire life would change irrevocably, and she still had no idea if she was making the right choice. That night, unable to sleep, she pulled out the journal one last time, flipped past the entry from 10 years ago. Past all the plans and preparations and carefully documented research, she wrote a new entry. Final one. Tomorrow I marry him. Tomorrow I find out if 10 years of waiting was wisdom or madness. Tomorrow I become someone new or lose myself entirely trying. I'm terrified, but I'm doing it anyway. Because some promises are worth keeping, even the ones that sound insane when you say them out loud. She closed the journal, set it aside. Tomorrow would come whether she was ready or not. The morning of the wedding, Liora woke to pounding on her door. She stumbled out of bed, pulled on a robe, opened it expecting her landlady or maybe Lady Margaret with some new crisis. Instead, Alaric stood there, disheveled, panicked, looking like he'd run the entire way. "You can't be here," she said automatically. "It's bad luck. I need to tell you something before we do this, before it's too late." Her heart stopped. "You're calling it off." "What? No, the opposite." He pushed into her room, started pacing. "I'm terrified, Liora, absolutely terrified. I woke up this morning and thought about everything that could go wrong, all the ways I could fail you, all the ways this could end badly. Alaric, and then I thought about not marrying you, about calling it off, letting you go, going back to being safe and alone. And that was worse. That was unbearable." He stopped, faced her. "I don't know if I'll be a good husband. I don't know if I can give you everything you deserve, but I know I want to try. More than I've ever wanted anything." Leora's throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I need you to know what you're getting. A man who's going to make mistakes, who's going to shut down sometimes even when he doesn't mean to, who's going to be terrified and uncertain and probably terrible at this." "I already knew all that. But did you really understand it? Because there's no going back after today, Liora. No easy exit. If you marry me, you're stuck with all of this, the messy parts, the broken parts, everything. And I need to know you're sure, completely sure. Not because you've been planning this for 10 years, but because you actually want this version of me, the real one, not who you hoped I'd be." She looked at him, really looked, at the man standing in her room at dawn on their wedding day, too scared to wait until the ceremony to make sure she understood what she was choosing. "You want honesty?" she said. "Always. I'm terrified too. I don't know how to be a duchess. I don't know if I'm strong enough for what's coming. I don't know if we'll survive the pressure or if society will crush us. I don't have answers to any of it. Then why? Because 10 years ago, I made a promise to a stranger. And yesterday I made a promise to myself that whatever happens, however hard it gets, I'm choosing you, the real you, broken parts and all. Even knowing I'll disappoint you, even then, as long as you promise the same. I promise." They stood there, dawn light filtering through the window, both terrified and certain in equal measure. "So," Alaric said finally, "are we doing this?" "We're doing this. No second thoughts? Thousands of second thoughts. Doing it anyway." He smiled. "That's my girl." "Your Duchess, you mean?" "No, my girl first, Duchess second." He kissed her, gentle and reverent and full of promises neither of them knew if they could keep. When he left, had to leave, the ceremony was in 4 hours and he still needed to get ready. Liora stood alone in the quiet room. In a few hours she'd stand in a church, say vows that would bind her life to his, become someone new. But right now, in this moment, she was still just Liora Vance. The girl who'd made an impossible promise and spent 10 years keeping it. She wondered what that 10-year-old would think if she could see this moment. Would she be proud? Disappointed? Shocked they'd actually made it this far? Probably all three. Liora dressed carefully. The gown was simple but beautiful. White silk, no excessive decoration. She'd chosen it specifically to avoid looking like she was trying too hard. Her mother helped with her hair, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe you actually did it," she whispered. 10 years. I thought you were dreaming." "So did everyone else." "But you weren't." "No, I wasn't." The church was half empty when she arrived. The Ashfords had made good on their threat. Not a single one attended. But Alaric's friends were there. Lady Margaret in the front row. Even Edmund Carey, who smiled sadly and nodded when she passed. And Alaric. standing at the altar, looking pale and determined and absolutely terrified. Their eyes met across the church. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. She started walking. But halfway down the aisle, the church doors burst open. A man strode in, older, expensively dressed, radiating authority and fury. "Stop this wedding," he commanded. Alaric went white. "Uncle Robert." Robert Ashford, head of the Ashford family, the man who'd orchestrated the entire boycott. "This farce ends now," Robert said, voice carrying through the shocked silence. "Duke Thornfield, step away from that woman before you destroy everything your mother built." The entire church held its breath, and Alaric had to make a choice. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The church was so silent, Liora could hear her own heartbeat hammering in her ears. Alaric stood frozen at the altar, his face drained of color. His uncle, imposing in dark formal wear, white hair swept back, carrying himself like a man accustomed to obedience, advanced down the aisle with measured steps. "Did you hear me, nephew?" Robert Ashford's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "Step away." Liora felt the eyes of every guest turn toward her, judging, measuring, waiting to see if she'd crumble. She didn't move. Alaric's hands were shaking. She could see it from where she stood, could see him fighting some internal battle she couldn't help him with. This was it. The real test. Not romance or declarations or grand gestures, just a man choosing between the family he'd known his entire life and a woman he'd known for months. Robert stopped in front of the altar, facing Alaric directly, ignoring Liora like she didn't exist. "Your mother would be ashamed," he said quietly, but in the acoustics of the church, everyone heard. "She built this family's reputation, maintained our standing through discipline and grace, and you're about to throw it away for—" He gestured dismissively without looking at Liora. "This." "Uncle Robert," Alaric's voice was barely steady. "You weren't invited." Clearly, since you knew I'd stop this madness, Robert's expression softened, became almost paternal. "I understand, boy. You're lonely. You've been lonely since Catherine died. But there are appropriate ways to address that. This girl has manipulated you." "Don't!" Alaric's voice cut through, sharper now. "Don't call her this girl." "What would you have me call her? A fortune hunter? A social climber who spent 10 years scheming? Her name," Alaric said, and his voice was gaining strength, "is Liora Vance, and you will address her with respect or leave." Murmurs rippled through the guests. Robert's jaw tightened. "I am trying to save you. From what? Happiness? Love? Actually living instead of just existing? From scandal. From damage to our family's name that will take generations to repair." "Our family's name," Alaric laughed, bitter and sharp. "Our family that orchestrated a smear campaign against an innocent woman? That threatened and blackmailed and spread lies? That family's name?" Robert's face flushed. "We were protecting, you were controlling, as you've always controlled, as my mother let you control her entire life until it killed her." The church gasped. This was family history being aired publicly, the kind of thing aristocrats never spoke about. "How dare you—" "No, how dare you!" Alaric stepped down from the altar, moving to stand between Robert and Liora. "You come into my wedding, interrupt a ceremony you weren't invited to, insult the woman I love, and expect me to what? Bow to your authority? Thank you for the intervention? I expect you to remember who you are." "I know exactly who I am," Alaric's voice rang through the church. "I'm the man who's been hiding for 15 years because he was too scared to feel anything, who built walls so high he forgot what it was like to be human, who was slowly dying inside and calling it dignity." Robert's expression hardened. "You're being dramatic." "Am I? When was the last time you asked how I was doing? When did you last care about anything beyond the Thornfield name and reputation?" Alaric's hands were still shaking, but his voice was steady now. "She saved me. This woman you're insulting, she saw me when I was invisible to everyone else, including myself. She manipulated. She challenged me. She refused to let me hide. And yes, she spent 10 years preparing for this moment. You know what that shows me? Dedication, commitment, The kind of determination and loyalty I'd be a fool to reject. Liora felt tears burning behind her eyes. She hadn't moved from her spot in the aisle, hadn't interfered. This was Alaric's choice, had to be his choice. Robert's voice dropped, became almost pleading. Think about what you're doing. The Ashfords will cut ties completely. Half of society will follow. Your children, if you have them, will be treated as pariahs. Is that really what you want? What I want, Alaric said quietly, is to marry the woman I love. The rest will sort itself out. This is your final answer? It's my only answer. Robert stared at him, some silent battle of wills that Liora couldn't read. Then his expression went cold. Then you leave me no choice. He turned to address the gathered guests. Let it be known that the Ashford family disowns Alaric Thornfield, effective immediately. He is no longer recognized as kin, no longer welcome in our homes. Any alliance with him is an alliance against us. More gasps. This was beyond a boycott. This was complete severance, social warfare declared openly. Alaric didn't flinch. So be it. Robert looked at him one last time. Something flickered in his eyes. Regret, maybe, or sadness. Then it was gone, buried under aristocratic coldness. You'll regret this, he said softly. Both of you. He turned and walked out. His footsteps echoed in the silence. For a long moment, nobody moved. The guests looked shell-shocked. The vicar looked like he wanted to crawl under the altar. Then Alaric turned to face Liora. He was pale, still shaking, looking like he'd just fought a war. But his eyes were clear. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For hesitating. For making you wait while I decided. You didn't hesitate. She closed the distance between them, took his hands in hers. You chose. Clearly. In front of everyone. I chose you. I know. Over my family. Over everything. I know, she repeated, squeezing his hands. And I'm choosing you too. Over safety. Over an easy life. Over everything. He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. She felt him trembling. I'm terrified, he whispered. Me too. What if he's right? What if I've just ruined both our lives? Then we'll be ruined together. He laughed, broken and watery. That's not comforting. It's honest. They stood there clinging to each other in front of a church full of witnesses, while the vicar cleared his throat awkwardly. Should we, continue? The vicar asked tentatively. Alaric pulled back, looked at Liora. Do you still want to? Are you serious? After all that, you think I'm walking away now? Just checking. Ask me properly. He smiled, small but genuine. Liora Vance, will you still marry me? Knowing what it will cost? Knowing we've just made powerful enemies? Yes. Will you marry me? Knowing I'm stubborn and difficult and possibly obsessive? Absolutely. Then let's finish this. They turned back to the altar. The vicar looked relieved. Right. Well, where were we? The ceremony continued, shortened now, rushed slightly because the tension in the church was still palpable. But they said the vows, exchanged rings, became husband and wife with witnesses who'd just seen them publicly defiant. When the vicar pronounced them married, the applause was scattered, uncertain. About half the guests clapped. The others sat in stunned silence. Liora didn't care. She was married. To Alaric. After 10 years, the promise was kept. They walked back down the aisle together, past shocked faces, past Lady Margaret, who was openly crying, past Edmund Carey, who mouthed congratulations with genuine warmth. Outside the church, they stood in the afternoon sunlight, alone for a moment before the guests would file out and the reception would begin. We did it, Alaric said. We really did. I just disowned my family. I noticed. That was probably stupid. Probably. She turned to face him. But it was also brave and honest and exactly what needed to happen. Was it? Yes. Because now everyone knows. There's no ambiguity, no wondering where you stand. You chose publicly and clearly. No one can question that. He considered this. I suppose that's true. And your uncle showed his true colors. Anyone who still sides with him after that performance, We don't need them anyway. You're very rational for someone whose wedding just got crashed. I'm very tired of caring what other people think. He kissed her. Right there on the church steps, in full view of anyone watching. Claiming her, she realized, making another public statement. The reception was strange. Half the planned guests hadn't come, the Ashfords and their closest allies. The ones who did attend were divided between those genuinely happy and those clearly attending out of obligation or curiosity. Liora moved through it in a daze, accepting congratulations that felt hollow, making small talk that felt exhausting, watching Alaric do the same, both of them performing for an audience that wasn't sure whether to applaud or condemn. It was Lady Margaret who finally cut through the awkwardness. She stood, tapped her glass for attention, and addressed the room with the authority of someone who'd navigated society for 60 years. I know what you're all thinking, she announced. Most of you are wondering if you backed the right horse, if aligning with the new Duke and Duchess means alienating the Ashfords, if this marriage is a scandal or a romance. The room fell silent. Let me make this simple. I am a Thornfield by blood, older than Robert Ashford and twice as stubborn. And I say this, my nephew made the right choice. Miss Vance, Duchess Thornfield now, is exactly what this family needs. Someone with spine, someone who doesn't bow to pressure, someone who sees Alaric as a man, not a title. She raised her glass. Anyone who can't accept that is welcome to leave. But know this, the Thornfields endure. We always have, and we'll endure this too. It wasn't quite a standing ovation, but it was enough. A few people stood, raised their glasses, others followed. Within moments, the whole room was standing. It was a victory, small but real. Later, when the reception finally ended and they were alone in the carriage heading to Thornfield House, Alaric leaned his head back and closed his eyes. That was exhausting. Completely. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. What other shoe? I don't know. Something worse. Some consequence I haven't anticipated. Maybe this is it. Maybe the worst already happened and we survived. You think so? No, but I'm choosing to hope anyway. He opened his eyes, looked at her. How are you so calm? I'm not calm. I'm terrified, but I'm also... She searched for the word. Relieved. It's done. No more waiting, no more wondering. We're married. Your uncle knows, society knows. Now we just have to live with it. Just, he repeated dryly. Exactly. Simple. He laughed. You're insane. You married me anyway. I did. He pulled her close. No regrets? Ask me in 10 years. That's not reassuring? It's honest. They arrived at Thornfield House. Her house now, too, she realized with a jolt, to find the staff lined up to greet them. A formal welcome for the new Duchess. Liora stood in the grand entrance hall, looking at the faces of 40 servants who'd be looking to her for direction, and felt panic claw at her throat. I don't know how to do this, she whispered to Alaric. Neither do I, he whispered back. We'll figure it out together. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Bancroft, older woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward. Welcome home, Your Grace, she said to Liora. Your Grace. The title felt foreign, wrong. Thank you, Liora managed. I'll need help, learning the routines, understanding how things work here. Mrs. Bancroft's expression softened slightly. Of course, Your Grace. We're here to assist. And please be patient with me. I'll make mistakes. Murmurs went through the staff. Apparently new duchesses didn't usually admit that. We all make mistakes, Your Grace, Mrs. Bancroft said. The difference is whether we learn from them. Over the next week, Liora learned exactly how much she didn't know. Managing a household this size was overwhelming. There were schedules to learn, budgets to approve, staff conflicts to mediate. She spent hours each day with Mrs. Bancroft, absorbing information like her life depended on it, which, in a way, it did, because the social attacks hadn't stopped. If anything, Robert Ashford's public disownment had emboldened the critics. The gossip papers were relentless. New Duchess struggles with basic household management. Staff reports confusion and disorder at Thornfield House. How long before Duke regrets his hasty marriage? Some of it was lies, some was exaggeration, but some, the parts about her inexperience, her mistakes, had enough truth to sting. Ignore it, Alaric said when he found her reading the papers one morning. Hard to ignore when it's everywhere. They're trying to break you. Don't let them. What if they're right? What if I'm not cut out for this? He took the newspaper, threw it in the fireplace. You've been a duchess for 1 week. Give yourself more than 7 days before deciding you've failed. That's not Liora. He turned her to face him. You spent 10 years preparing for this. Not for the household management. Fine, that's new. But for the scrutiny, the pressure, the attacks. This is what you knew was coming. Don't crumble now. I'm not crumbling. No? No, I'm just adjusting badly. Then adjust better. She almost laughed. That's terrible advice. I know. I'm terrible at this too. He kissed her forehead. But we're terrible together. That counts for something. The breakthrough came 2 weeks after the wedding. Liora was meeting with the household staff about the upcoming dinner party, their first major social event as a married couple. She'd been agonizing over every detail, terrified of making a mistake that would confirm everyone's worst opinions. The seating chart needs to be perfect, she said for the 5th time, studying the names. Mrs. Bancroft cleared her throat. If I may, Your Grace. Please. You're trying too hard to please everyone. It's impossible. Someone will always be offended by their placement, their menu, something. Then how? You make choices based on what you believe is right, and you stand by them. The staff will follow your lead. But you need to lead, not apologize. Liora stared at her. That's what Lady Margaret said. Lady Margaret is a smart woman. Everyone keeps telling me to be confident, but I don't feel confident. Then act confident anyway. Eventually, it becomes real. That night, Liora sat down and rewrote the seating chart, not based on who she thought she should please, but on what made strategic sense. She put potential allies near each other, separated hostile factions, placed herself where she could control the conversation flow. When she showed Alaric, he studied it for a long moment. This is going to make some people angry, he said. I know. You're putting Lord Henley next to Lady Whitmore. They hate each other. They hate your uncle more, giving them common ground. He looked at her with something like admiration. You're playing politics. I spent 10 years studying these people. Might as well use what I learned. This is dangerous. If it backfires, then it backfires. But at least I'll have tried something instead of just waiting to be accepted. He kissed her. Have I mentioned you're terrifying? Frequently. Good. Don't stop. The dinner party was a calculated risk. Liora invited carefully, people who were still undecided about the marriage, who could be swayed with the right approach. She excluded the obvious enemies, included the potential allies. And she prepared, studied current events, political tension, social dynamics, planned conversation topics, anticipated conflicts. You're overthinking this, Alaric said the night before. Probably. Can't stop now. What if it goes badly? Then everyone will say I'm an incompetent duchess who can't even host a dinner, which they already think, so nothing lost. Optimistic. Realistic. The night of the party, Liora dressed carefully. Not too elaborate, didn't want to look like she was trying too hard, but elegant, appropriate. She studied herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. Ready? Alaric appeared behind her. No. Good. Neither am I. The guests arrived. Liora greeted each one personally, remembered details about their families, made small talk that was carefully crafted to be engaging without being controversial. She watched them assess her, measure her, try to find the fortune hunter the newspapers described. Dinner was tense at first. People were polite but distant. The conversation stilted. Then Lord Henley made a comment about the current state of Parliament. Lady Whitmore countered with a sharp observation about political hypocrisy. And suddenly they were arguing, not angrily, but engagingly, drawing others into the debate. Liora had counted on this, had seated them together specifically to create this dynamic. She let it develop, then steered the conversation when it threatened to become too heated, asked questions that redirected energy, brought quieter guests into the discussion. By the second course, the table was alive with actual conversation. By dessert, people were laughing. After dinner, when the men had separated for brandy and the women for tea, Lady Whitmore approached Liora. "That was well played," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." "Putting Henley and me together, you knew we'd spar, knew it would energize the table." Liora considered lying, decided against it. "Yes. Clever." Lady Whitmore studied her. "The newspapers paint you as an opportunistic fool. You're neither." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I'm still deciding if I like you." "That's fair. But I'll say this, you're more interesting than half the duchesses in London. And Alaric looks happier than I've seen him in years." She paused. "That counts for something." "Does it?" "It does to people paying attention." Lady Whitmore smiled slightly. "Keep doing what you're doing. Eventually, the rest will catch up." After the guests left, Liora collapsed onto the sofa in the drawing room. "How did I do?" she asked Alaric. "You were brilliant." "Don't lie to make me feel better." "I'm not. You manipulated that entire table into actually enjoying themselves. Half those people came expecting to be bored or scandalized. They left planning to attend our next event." "Did they?" "Lord Henley asked me about our schedule next month. Lady Whitmore invited us to her salon. Even the Duchess of Marlborough looked impressed." Liora felt something loosen in her chest. Not quite relief, it was too early for that, but hope. "We survived," she said. "We did more than survive. We fought back." "One dinner party doesn't change everything?" "No, but it's a start." The newspaper coverage the next day was mixed. Some papers praised the evening. Others found ways to criticize. The menu was too simple, the guest list too calculated. The new Duchess was trying too hard. But buried in the society pages was a single line that made Liora stop breathing. "Perhaps we have underestimated the new Duchess Thornfield." Time will tell. It wasn't an endorsement, but it was acknowledgement, recognition that she was more than the caricature they'd painted. "Look at this," she showed Alaric. He read it, smiled. "They're starting to see." "See what?" "That you're formidable, that you're not going anywhere, that you're exactly what I needed. We're not out of the woods yet." "No, but we're moving in the right direction." Over the next month, Liora hosted 2 more events, each one carefully planned, each one building on the last. Slowly, incrementally, opinions began to shift, not everyone's. The Ashfords and their closest allies remained hostile, but the undecided middle, the people who'd been waiting to see which way the wind blew, started accepting her. Invitations started arriving again. Not as many as before the scandal, but enough. Liora accepted some, declined others. Made strategic choices about where to be seen and with whom. She learned to navigate society the way she'd studied it, as a game with rules and players and objectives, and she started winning. Lady Margaret visited one afternoon, found Liora reviewing correspondence in the study. "You've changed," she observed. "Have I?" "When I first met you, you were terrified of making mistakes. Now you make them deliberately." "I wouldn't say deliberately. You snubbed the Countess of Bedford last week. That was intentional." Liora didn't deny it. "She spread lies about me during the scandal. I'm not rewarding that with my attention. Making enemies is dangerous." "So is being a doormat." Lady Margaret smiled. "There she is, the woman who gave Alaric an ultimatum. I was starting to wonder if she'd been buried under Duchess training. I'm trying to find a balance. Be appropriate enough not to cause constant scandal, but not so appropriate I disappear. It's working. People are talking about you differently." "How?" "Like you're a person instead of a problem." Lady Margaret sat down. "Robert still hates you, of course." "Of course. But his influence is waning. Turns out publicly disowning your nephew at his wedding doesn't make you look reasonable." "Who knew?" "Half of his allies have quietly distanced themselves. The other half are too proud to admit they backed the wrong position." "Does that mean we've won?" "Won? No. But you're no longer losing. That's progress." That night, Liora stood in the Duchess's bedroom, her bedroom now, and stared at her reflection. She looked different, carried herself differently. The girl who'd made a promise 10 years ago was gone. The woman who'd stood in a church while her world fell apart was fading too. In her place was someone harder, more strategic, someone who'd learned to fight instead of just endure. She wasn't sure if that was good or bad. Alaric appeared in the doorway. "You're brooding, thinking. Same thing with you." He crossed the room, wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What about?" "Whether I've lost myself in all this. Whether becoming a duchess means I'm not Liora anymore." "Are you?" "I don't know. Sometimes I look in the mirror and don't recognize who's looking back." "That's terrifying." "Yes. But also necessary, maybe." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "You can't stay the same person and survive this world. Something has to change." "What if I change too much? What if I become someone you don't recognize?" "Then I'll learn to know the new version." He turned her to face him. "I didn't fall in love with a static person, Liora. I fell in love with someone fierce and determined and constantly evolving. If you change, we'll change together. That's assuming we survive long enough to change." "We'll survive." "How can you be sure?" "Because you're the woman who spent 10 years preparing for an impossible goal, and I'm the man who was too stubborn to admit he needed someone. Together, we're insufferable." She laughed despite herself. "That's your pitch? We're insufferable?" "It's worked so far." "Fair point." He kissed her, and for a moment everything else fell away. The pressure, the scrutiny, the constant performance. Just the two of them, figuring out how to be married in the middle of a war. When they pulled apart, Liora felt steadier. "We're going to make it through this," she said. Not a question, a declaration. "Yes. Not because it's easy or because everyone accepts us, but because we're too stubborn to fail." "Exactly." He smiled. "I can work with that." 3 months after the wedding, the turning point came. Robert Ashford attended a dinner at the Duke of Marlborough's estate. So did Alaric and Liora, their first time in the same space since the wedding. Liora had debated attending. It was asking for confrontation, but avoiding Robert forever meant giving him power. So she'd accepted the invitation. They arrived to find the party already in full swing. Robert stood near the fireplace, surrounded by his remaining allies. He saw them enter and his expression went cold. For a moment, Liora thought he might leave, or cause a scene. Instead, he simply turned his back. A deliberate cut. Several people noticed. Whispers started. Alaric's jaw tightened. "We should stay," Liora said quietly. "We're not running." They moved through the party, made conversation, pretended the elephant in the room didn't exist. It was Lady Marlborough who finally addressed it. "This is awkward," she announced to the room. Robert Ashford and Alaric Thornfield in the same space, pretending the other doesn't exist. Everyone froze. "I propose we settle this," she continued, "like adults. Robert, you have grievances. State them. Alaric, respond. Let's clear the air before it poisons the rest of the season." Robert looked furious. "I have nothing to say to—" "Then say it to the room," Lady Marlborough interrupted. "Tell us all why you're still boycotting your own nephew." It was a trap. Liora saw it immediately. If Robert stated his case publicly, he'd have to defend positions that were starting to look unreasonable. If he refused, he'd look petty. Robert seemed to realize this too. His jaw worked. "Fine," he said finally. "My nephew married beneath him. Married a woman with no title, no fortune, no standing. A woman who manipulated her way into his life through deceit and calculation." The room went silent. Alaric stepped forward. "Are you finished?" "No, I believe she targeted you deliberately. Spent years planning this. That's not love. It's ambition." "You're right," Liora said. Everyone turned to stare at her. Even Alaric looked shocked. She stepped forward, facing Robert directly. "You're absolutely right," she repeated. "I did target him deliberately. I did spend 10 years planning. Every choice I made was aimed at this outcome." Gasps rippled through the room. "The difference," Liora continued, "is motive. You assume I wanted his title, his money, his status. You assume I'm a fortune hunter who saw an opportunity. Aren't you?" "No, I wanted him. Specifically him. Not his title. Him. The man who's brilliant and broken and too stubborn to admit he's lonely. I spent 10 years becoming someone worthy of that man, not worthy of a duke, worthy of Alaric. Robert's expression didn't soften. Semantics. Is it? She turned to address the room. How many of you have ever loved someone completely, shaped your life around them, made choices based on the hope, not the guarantee, just the hope, that they might choose you back? Silence. That's what I did. Was it obsessive? Probably. Was it unusual? Definitely. But it was real, and it was honest. More honest than half the marriages in this room that were arranged for convenience or status or money. You're making excuses. I'm telling the truth. She faced Robert again. You want to know my real crime? I didn't wait to be chosen. I refused to be passive. I decided what I wanted and went after it with everything I had. That's what threatens you. Not that I'm beneath Alaric, but that I refused to accept that I was. The room was utterly silent. Robert's face had gone red. This is absurd. Is it? Lady Whitmore spoke up from across the room. Because it sounds like the kind of determination we claim to admire, just usually in men. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the guests. She's not nobility, Robert tried again. Neither was my grandmother, Lord Henley interjected. My grandfather married her for love, caused a huge scandal. They were happy for 40 years. More murmurs. The tide was shifting. Robert looked around, saw his support crumbling, and his expression turned desperate. She'll ruin him. I've seen him with her, Lady Margaret's voice cut through. He's happier than he's been in 15 years. If that's ruin, perhaps we need more of it. The room erupted in conversation, some agreeing, some still skeptical. But the unified front against Liora was breaking. Robert stared at her with something between hatred and grudging respect. You planned this, he said quietly. This confrontation. You knew I'd have to defend my position publicly. I accepted an invitation to a party, Liora said. What happened after that was your choice. Clever, he admitted. Then, louder, to the room. Fine. You want my final word? Here it is. I don't approve. I never will. But I'm tired of fighting a battle I'm clearly losing. He turned to Alaric. You want her? Keep her. But don't expect my blessing or my support. I've never expected either, Alaric said. Robert nodded once. Then he left. Several of his closest allies followed, but notably, several didn't. The party continued. Conversations resumed, and Liora felt something shift fundamentally. Not acceptance, not yet, but acknowledgement. Recognition that she wasn't going anywhere, that she'd earned her place through sheer force of will. Later, in the carriage home, Alaric pulled her close. That was incredible, he said. That was terrifying. You faced down my uncle in front of half of London society and didn't flinch. I flinched internally. Still counts. He kissed her temple. Did you plan it? The confrontation? No, but when Lady Marlborough created the opportunity, I took it. By admitting everything. That was a risk. Lying would have been riskier. Everyone already suspected the truth. Owning it took away its power. Where did you learn that? From you. You taught me that hiding doesn't work. Being honest does. He laughed. I taught you badly if that's what you learned. Then it's fortunate I'm a good student. When they arrived home, Mrs. Bancroft was waiting with news. 3 new invitations arrived this evening, Your Grace, she said to Liora, from families who'd previously declined to acknowledge you. Liora took them, read the names, felt something like triumph settle in her chest. Send acceptances, she said. All 3? All 3. After Mrs. Bancroft left, Alaric looked at her with open admiration. You're not just surviving anymore, he said. You're conquering. Not conquering, just refusing to disappear. Same thing in this world. She leaned against him, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline from the confrontation was fading, leaving her shaky. I keep waiting for it to get easier, she admitted. Does it? No, but I'm getting better at managing hard. We both are. They stood together in the entrance hall of their home, battle-worn and stubborn, having faced down enemies and survived. It wasn't the happy ending she'd imagined at 10 years old. It was messier, harder, more complicated. But it was real. And it was theirs. And standing there in Alaric's arms, Liora finally understood what she'd been fighting for all these years. Not a fantasy, not a title, not security, just this moment, this person, this life they were building together, one difficult day at a time. The fortress hadn't just broken. They'd demolished it completely and built something new in its place, something imperfect but honest, something worth fighting for. Something imperfect but honest, something worth fighting for. The winter of 1819 arrived with unusual cold. London society retreated to country estates, leaving the city quieter, emptier. Most couples would have followed, escaped to warmer drawing rooms and familiar territory. Liora and Alaric stayed. "Everyone expects us to hide," Liora said one morning over breakfast, reading through correspondence, "to take the socially acceptable retreat." "And?" Alaric looked up from his own letters. "I think we should host the Winter Charity Gala here, in London. Make it the event of the season." He set down his coffee. "That's ambitious." "That's the point. The Charity Gala is traditionally hosted by the Ashford family. Was, until your uncle decided family feuds were more important than hungry children. If we take it over, it'll look like a power play." "It is a power play." She met his eyes. "Robert abandoned the charity when he disowned you. Someone needs to fill that void."
"Why not us?" "Because it'll make enemies. We already have enemies. Might as well do something useful while we're at it." He studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "You've changed." "Have I?" 6 months ago, you were terrified of making mistakes. Now you're deliberately courting controversy." "I learned from the best." She pushed a list across the table. "I've already drafted a guest list and budget. We can fund it ourselves. No need for sponsorships that come with strings attached." Alaric scanned the documents. His eyebrows rose. "This is half our discretionary funds for the year." "Yes." "That's not sustainable." "It's not meant to be. It's a statement that we're serious about this, that we're not just playing at charity for social points." He set down the papers. "You've really thought this through." "I've had time. Winter's boring when you're avoiding society." "We're not avoiding Alaric. We've attended 3 events in 2 months. We're absolutely avoiding." He sighed. "Fair point." "So, are we doing this?" He looked at her, really looked, the way he had in his garden 10 years ago when she'd told him she'd marry him someday, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected but couldn't look away from. "Yes," he said finally. "Let's do it." The announcement went out 2 weeks later, the Thornfield Winter Charity Gala, to benefit the children's school. Alaric had been funding anonymously for years. Open invitation to anyone who wished to attend. Donations encouraged but not required. The response was immediate and divided. Half of society praised the initiative. The other half called it a transparent attempt to steal the Ashfords' legacy and buy social acceptance. Robert Ashford himself sent a letter, short, venomous. "You've gone too far. This will not be forgotten." Liora pinned it to the wall of her study. "Motivation," she explained when Alaric found it there. "That's disturbing. That's practical." Organizing the gala consumed the next month. Liora threw herself into it with the same intensity she'd once devoted to studying Alaric. Guest coordination, menu planning, entertainment, decorations, every detail scrutinized and perfected. Mrs. Bancroft watched her with something approaching concern. "Your Grace, you need to sleep." "I'll sleep after the gala. You said that 3 nights ago. And I meant it 3 nights ago. Circumstances changed. You're going to make yourself ill." "I'm fine." "You're running on coffee and stubbornness." Liora looked up from the seating chart she'd been revising. "Your point?" "My point is that the Duke is worried about you. So am I." "Tell him I'm fine." "I did. He didn't believe me either." That night, Alaric found her asleep at her desk, face pressed against a guest list. He carried her to bed without waking her, and when she woke at dawn, she found him asleep in a chair beside the bed. "You didn't have to stay," she said softly. His eyes opened. "Yes, I did." "I'm not going to break." "I know, but I'm allowed to worry anyway." "The gala will be fine. You've planned it perfectly. Now you need to trust that it'll work." "What if it doesn't?" "Then it doesn't. We'll survive either way. She sat up, pulled her knees to her chest. I need it to work, Alaric. Not for me, for you. You gave up your family for me. Lost half your social standing. The least I can do is prove it was worth it. You don't have to prove anything. Yes, I do. To them, to you, to myself. He moved to sit beside her on the bed. Liora, I need you to hear something, really hear it. What? You've already proved it. The woman who faced down my uncle in front of London society, who turned our household from chaos into something functional, who learned to navigate politics in 6 months when most duchesses take years. You've already proven everything. Then why does it still feel like I'm failing? Because you're measuring yourself against an impossible standard. Perfection. But perfection was never the goal. Survival was. And we're surviving. Together. She leaned against him. I'm tired. I know. I don't mean physically. I mean tired of fighting, tired of being scrutinized, tired of every choice being a potential scandal. Do you regret it? No. Never. But sometimes I wish it was easier. Me too. They sat in silence while dawn light filtered through the curtains. Outside, London was waking up. Inside, they were just two people trying to figure out how to be married in the middle of a war they hadn't chosen but refused to surrender. What do you need? Alaric asked finally. From you? From anything. She thought about it. I need to know this ends, that eventually we get to just be people instead of symbols, that we're not fighting forever. I can't promise that. I know, but I can promise that whatever we're fighting it together. No retreating, no shutting down, even when I'm scared. Especially when you're scared. Especially then. She kissed him, soft and grateful and exhausted. Okay, she whispered. Let's finish this. The night of the gala, Thornfield House was transformed. Evergreen garlands, candlelight everywhere, musicians in the grand hall. The staff had worked miracles, and the result was elegant without being ostentatious. Warm despite the winter cold. Guests began arriving at 7. Liora stood in the receiving line beside Alaric, greeting each person individually, remembering names, asking after families, making connections. She wore deep burgundy, Lady Margaret's suggestion. Stand out without being loud, she'd said. It worked. Against the winter whites and pale blues most women wore, Liora looked striking, memorable. By 8, the house was full. Laughter, conversation, the clink of champagne glasses. People who'd been enemies months ago were talking civilly. The atmosphere was almost festive. Then Robert Ashford arrived. The room didn't fall silent. Not quite. But conversations faltered. People turned to watch. He stood in the doorway, surveying the scene with cold calculation. Then his eyes found Liora. She felt Alaric tense beside her. I didn't invite him, she whispered. I know. Should we? No, he came publicly. We greet him publicly. They crossed the room together, met Robert in the entrance hall. Uncle, Alaric said neutrally. Nephew. Robert's tone was arctic. Then to Liora. Duchess. It was the first time he'd used her title. Small acknowledgement, but acknowledgement nonetheless. Lord Ashford, she replied carefully. We weren't expecting you. I'm sure you weren't, yet here I am. Why? The blunt question made him blink. Then something almost like respect flickered across his face. Because I was curious, he admitted, to see if you could actually pull this off. Taking over the charity my family built. We're not taking over anything. We're filling a void you created. Semantics. Accuracy. They stared at each other. Some silent battle that Liora refused to lose. May I look around? Robert asked finally. It's a charity event. Everyone's welcome. Even enemies? Especially enemies. Their money spends the same as anyone's. He almost smiled. Almost. Pragmatic. Necessary. He walked past them into the main hall. Liora exhaled slowly. That was intense, Alaric muttered. That was a test. Which you passed. Maybe. Or maybe I just delayed the real confrontation. She was right. An hour later, Robert approached them again. This time, he wasn't alone. He'd brought Lord Pemberton and the Duke of Marlborough, two of the most influential men in London society. "We've been discussing something," Robert said without preamble. Liora braced herself. "What?" "Your marriage. It's
Legitimacy. The word hung in the air like a threat.
What about it?"
Alaric's voice was dangerous.
"There are questions about the circumstances, the rushed engagement, the scandal, the convenient timing." "Convenient for whom?" "For a woman looking to secure a title." Liora felt ice in her veins. "We're not having this conversation. Not here. Not tonight."
"No?"
Robert's smile was cold. "Then when? When will you address the fact that half of London still believes you manipulated your way into this marriage?" "I don't care what half of London believes." "You should, because their belief shapes reality. And right now, reality says you're a fortune hunter who got lucky." "Robert," Alaric stepped forward, "that's enough." "Is it?" "Because I'm simply saying what everyone's thinking, that this marriage was built on deception and ambition, not love." "You know nothing about our marriage." "Don't I?" Robert turned to address the room. People had stopped even pretending not to listen. "She spent 10 years planning this, 10 years studying you, positioning herself, calculating every move. That's not romance, that's strategy." "It's both," Liora said. Everyone turned to her. "It's strategy and romance," she continued, voice carrying. "I did spend 10 years planning. I did calculate every move. I studied Alaric until I knew him better than he knew himself. And yes, that's unusual. Yes, it's intense, but it's also the most honest thing I've ever done." "Honesty," Robert scoffed. "From a woman who manipulated—" "I didn't manipulate anything. I made a choice at 10 years old and spent a decade backing it up. I could have given up, could have chosen someone easier, someone who wouldn't require years of preparation and sacrifice. But I didn't, because I wanted him. Specifically him. Everything he was, including the parts he tried to hide." The room was utterly silent now. "You call that manipulation," Liora continued. "I call it commitment. I call it knowing what I wanted and refusing to settle for less. I call it loving someone enough to become worthy of them." "Worthy," Robert repeated. "You think you're worthy of a duke?" "I think I'm worthy of Alaric. The duke is just a title. The man is what matters." "Spoken like someone who's never had to bear the weight of a title." "You're right, I haven't. But I've borne the weight of loving someone I couldn't have, of building myself into someone better while knowing I might fail anyway, of risking everything for a promise I made at 10 years old. That weight? I've carried it for a decade, so don't tell me I don't understand sacrifice." Lord Pemberton cleared his throat. "If I may—" "No," Robert cut him off. "This woman has poisoned—" "Enough." The word came from an unexpected source. The Duke of Marlborough stepped forward. "Robert, you've made your point, repeatedly, over months, and I think I speak for most of us when I say, we're tired of it." Robert stared at him. "You're defending her?" "I'm acknowledging reality. She's the Duchess Thornfield. Has been for 6 months. She's proven herself capable, intelligent, and resilient. Whether you approve of how she got here is irrelevant." "Irrelevant?" "Yes. Irrelevant. Because Alaric chose her, publicly, repeatedly. And she's chosen him back just as publicly. That's more than most aristocratic marriages can claim." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Robert's face flushed. "You're all fools. She's using him. For what?" Lady Margaret's voice cut through. She appeared beside Liora, regal and formidable. "What exactly is she using him for? She's taken on a role she wasn't prepared for, endured public humiliation and scrutiny, learned to manage a household and navigate society while being attacked at every turn. If that's using someone, it's the most masochistic strategy I've ever witnessed." "She wants his money. She hasn't touched his money. I've seen the household accounts. She still uses her own funds for personal expenses. Even refused the jewelry allowance." This was news to most of the room. Whispers intensified. "She wants status." She had status, limited, but respectable. She traded that for being the most scrutinized woman in London. Again, terrible strategy for a social climber. Robert was losing ground and knew it. "Then what does she want?" "Him," Alaric said quietly. "She wants me.
Just me, exactly as I am. It's the simplest thing in the world and the hardest thing for you to understand." The two men stared at each other, uncle and nephew, family divided by something neither could bridge. "I will never approve of this marriage," Robert said finally. "I know," Alaric replied. "I've accepted that." "You've chosen her over your family." "I've chosen her over your version of family, the version that demands obedience over happiness, control over love. There's a difference. You'll regret this." "Maybe, but it'll be my regret to bear, not yours." Robert looked around the room, at the faces watching, judging, no longer entirely on his side. Something in his expression cracked. Not surrender, but acknowledgement. "Fine," he said, voice tight. "You want her? Keep her. But don't expect me to watch the consequences." He left. This time, only two of his closest allies followed. The rest stayed. The room exhaled collectively. Lady Marlborough was the first to move. She raised her glass. "To the Duke and Duchess Thornfield, may their marriage continue to scandalize and inspire in equal measure." Laughter. Genuine laughter. And then everyone was raising glasses, toasting, the tension breaking like a fever. Liora felt her knees go weak. Alaric caught her, held her steady. "We did it," he whispered. "What did we do?" "We won." "Did we?" "Look around." She did. Saw people smiling at them. Saw Lady Whitmore nodding approval. Saw the Duke of Marlborough talking animatedly with other guests about the charity's goals. Saw acceptance. Not universal, never universal, but real. "Oh," she breathed. "Yes, oh." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People approached them with genuine warmth. Donations exceeded expectations. They raised enough to fund the school for 2 years. Several influential families asked about collaborating on future charitable projects. By the time the last guest left at 2 in the morning, Liora was exhausted and elated, and still processing what had happened. She and Alaric stood in the empty grand hall, surrounded by the remnants of the gala. Abandoned champagne glasses, wilting flowers, candles burned low. "We should probably sleep," Alaric said. "Probably." Neither moved. "Alaric?" "Your uncle was wrong about something." "Just one thing?" "Well, many things, but one in particular." She turned to face him. "He said I manipulated my way into this marriage, that it wasn't built on love." "He's wrong." "I know, but here's the thing. I did manipulate circumstances. I did plan and strategize. I built myself into someone I thought you'd want. That part was true." "Where are you going with this?" "I'm going somewhere honest, which is that I fell in love with you twice. Once at 10 years old with an idea of who you were, and again 6 months ago with who you actually are. The second time was harder, scarier, because you were real and flawed, and sometimes infuriating." "That's romantic." "I'm serious. The fantasy version of you from my childhood? That was easy to love. But the real you, the one who shuts down when scared, who struggles to be vulnerable, who makes terrible decisions about when to be noble, that version is harder." "You're really selling this." "But that's the version I chose. Not the Duke, not the fantasy, just you. Difficult, complicated, beautiful you." His expression softened. "I don't know what to say to that." "Say you feel the same." "I feel the same. Exactly the same. I fell in love with your determination first, your intelligence, your refusal to give up. But then I fell in love with your stubbornness, your terrible sleep habits, the way you pin threatening letters to your wall as motivation. That's once. The way you apologize to servants when they apologize to you, creating infinite loops of politeness that Mrs. Bancroft finds hilarious. She told you about that? The way you read terrible novels and cry at the endings even though they're predictable. How do you know about the way you're terrified of failure but do things anyway? The way you're stronger than you think and more vulnerable than you pretend." He cupped her face in his hands. "I love all of it, even the parts that drive me insane." She kissed him, long and slow and full of everything they'd survived to get here. When they pulled apart, she was crying. "Happy tears?" he asked. "I think so. I'm not entirely sure. There's been a lot of emotions tonight."
Valid. They stood together in the empty hall, holding each other while the candles guttered out one by one. What happens now? Liora asked. Now? Now we live. That's it? That's everything. The next morning, Liora woke to find Alaric already up, sitting by the window with the newspaper. Anything interesting? She asked sleepily. Depends on your definition of interesting. He handed her the paper. The headline read, Thornfield Gala raises record funds for charity. New Duchess proves her worth below it. A surprisingly positive article about the event. Quotes from guests praising the organization, the cause, the hosts, even a grudging acknowledgement that perhaps society had been too harsh in its initial judgment. We made the papers, Liora said, positively for once. Will it last? Probably not. Something else will scandalize everyone next week. Good, I'm tired of being the scandal. He laughed. Welcome to aristocratic life. There's always a scandal. Comforting. Over the next week, something shifted fundamentally. Invitations increased. People who'd avoided them started engaging. The Ashford boycott was still in place, but its power had waned. Liora settled into her role with more confidence. She wasn't perfect, made mistakes regularly, fumbled social situations occasionally, but she stopped apologizing for not being born into this world. She was learning to be herself within it, finding the balance between Liora Vance and Duchess Thornfield. 3 months after the gala, Lady Margaret invited them for tea. I have news, she announced once they were settled. Good news? Alaric asked warily. That depends on your perspective. Robert has agreed to cease active hostilities. Liora set down her teacup. What? He won't reconcile, won't attend your events or acknowledge the marriage as legitimate, but he'll stop actively campaigning against you. Why? Because he's lost. His allies have mostly abandoned him. His influence is diminished. Continuing the fight only makes him look petty. So we won, Alaric said slowly. You survived, which in this world amounts to the same thing. Liora felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief, not quite, but something close. What made him stop? She asked. You did, both of you. You proved you weren't going anywhere, that you could weather the storm. Eventually, even Robert had to acknowledge reality. He still hates me. Probably. But his hatred has lost its power. That's what matters. After they left, walking through the park on their way home, Liora stopped suddenly. What is it? Alaric asked. I just realized something. What? I've been so focused on proving myself, on surviving, on fighting. I forgot to notice when we'd actually made it. Made it where? Here. This. A life that's actually ours. Not perfect, not accepted by everyone, but real and sustainable and good. He smiled. Took you long enough to notice. I was busy being terrified. Fair. They continued walking. Around them, London moved through its afternoon routines. People shopping, children playing, carriages rattling past. Ordinary life. Alaric? Yes? Thank you. For what? For choosing me back. For not giving up when it got hard. For being exactly who I needed, even when that wasn't who I expected. You're welcome. Thank you for being stubborn enough to fight for this. Stubbornness is my specialty. I've noticed. That night they hosted a small dinner. Just close friends, Lady Margaret, Lady Whitmore, Lord Henley, the Marlboroughs. Intimate and comfortable. Over dessert, Lady Whitmore raised a topic. I've been thinking about next season's charity focus, she said. The School for Poor Children is wonderful, but there are other needs. What did you have in mind? Liora asked. Education for girls, specifically girls from families that can't afford traditional schooling. That's ambitious. So is taking over the Winter Gala, but you managed. Liora looked at Alaric. He shrugged. Your call. You're better at this than I am. We could partner, Liora said to Lady Whitmore. Share the planning and execution. I was hoping you'd say that. They spent the next hour discussing possibilities, plans forming, ideas building. At some point, Liora realized she wasn't just participating, she was leading, directing conversation, making decisions, being heard. When had that happened?
When had she stopped being the outsider, fighting for acceptance, and become someone people looked to? She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, just knew that somewhere between the wedding and now, she'd stopped performing and started living. Later, alone in their bedroom, Alaric found her staring at her reflection again. "Still don't recognize yourself?" he asked. "No, I do now. That's the difference. And I like who I see. She's harder than I expected, more scarred, but stronger too. You've earned those scars. Have I?" "Every single one." She turned to face him. "Do you ever regret it, choosing this path?" "Honestly? Always. Sometimes, when I think about my uncle, about the family relationships that are permanently damaged, when I imagine what life would have been like if I'd married someone appropriate and easy." Her heart sank. "Oh. But then I remember what I was before you, empty, going through motions, slowly dying inside without even realizing it, and I know that any path that doesn't include you isn't one worth taking. That's true and terrifying because you have that much power over me. You always have. Since the moment you told me you'd marry me and I was stupid enough to laugh." "You weren't stupid. I was 10. You were certain. At 10 years old, you knew exactly what you wanted. Took me 13 more years to figure out you were right." She kissed him, soft and grateful and full of promise. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too. Even when you're stubborn and exhausting. Especially then. Especially then." 6 months later, Liora sat in her study reviewing plans for the girls' education initiative. It had grown beyond anything she'd anticipated. Partnerships with 3 different schools, funding from a dozen noble families, applications from girls across London. A knock interrupted her work. "Come in?" Mrs. Bancroft entered, looking pleased. "Your Grace, there's someone here to see you." "Who?" "Edmund Carey." Leora's eyebrows rose. She hadn't seen Edmund since the wedding. "Send him in." Edmund appeared, looking slightly older, still kind. He smiled when he saw her. "Duchess Thornfield, you've done well." "Edmund, this is a surprise." "A pleasant one, I hope." "Of course, please sit." He did, studied her for a moment. "You look happy." "I am." "Good. I wanted to see it for myself." "Why?" "Because I cared about you. Still do, in a way. Wanted to make sure you got what you were fighting for." "I did. Not exactly how I imagined, but yes. Better or worse than the imagination? Different. Harder. More real." He nodded. "I'm getting married. Congratulations." "Thank you. She's wonderful. Nothing like you, which is probably good. I don't think I could handle 2 stubborn women in one lifetime." Liora laughed. "Smart man." "I learned from experience." He paused. "I came to tell you something else, too." "What?" "That I was wrong. When you ended things, I thought you were chasing a fantasy, refusing to accept reality for what could have been a perfectly good life together. You weren't wrong. I was. Because you knew what you needed, and you were brave enough to fight for it, even when it meant losing something safe. That's not fantasy. That's courage." She felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you." "You're welcome. And Liora?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you got your impossible thing. The world needs more people who refuse to settle." After he left, she sat alone in the study and let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of having survived, of having fought for something impossible and won. That evening, she and Alaric walked through the Thornfield Gardens, the same gardens where she'd made her promise at 10 years old, where she'd confronted him at 20, where they'd built the foundation of something real. "I was thinking," Alaric said, "dangerous. We should plant something, a tree, maybe, something that will grow with us. That's unusually sentimental. I'm married to you. I'm learning sentimentality." They chose a spot near the fountain, an oak sapling that would take decades to mature, would outlive them both, probably. As they patted dirt around its roots, Liora thought about everything that had led here. 10 years of preparation, 6 months of war, countless moments of doubt and fear and stubborn determination.
Do you think we'll make it? She asked. Long term? I think we've already made it. Everything else is just continuation. That's optimistic. That's realistic. We survived the worst already. The rest is just living. Just living, she repeated. I like that. They stood together in the fading light, hands dirty from planting, looking at the small tree that represented their future. It wasn't perfect. The sapling was slightly crooked, the placement not quite centered, but it was theirs, growing, alive, like them. That night, Liora pulled out her journal one final time, flipped past all the entries, the plans, the fears, the victories and defeats. She wrote one last note. I spent 10 years preparing for him, 6 months fighting for us, and now I get forever learning how to be happy. The girl who made the promise was right. The woman who kept it is grateful. And the Duchess who emerged from it all? She's finally home. She closed the journal, set it on the shelf where it would gather dust with all the other records of who she used to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Society would find new scandals. The Ashfords would remain hostile. Life would continue to be complicated and difficult and imperfect. But tonight, she was simply Liora Thornfield, wife, Duchess, woman who'd refused to accept impossible as an answer. She found Alaric in their bedroom, reading by lamplight. He looked up when she entered. Done writing? For now. What were you writing about? Endings and beginnings, and the space between where we actually live. Philosophical. It's been that kind of day. He set down his book, held out his hand. She took it, let him pull her close. I'm glad you were stubborn, he said. I'm glad you finally listened. Took me long enough. Worth the wait. They settled into bed together, tangled in each other, comfortable in the silence. Outside, London slept. Inside Thornfield House, servants finished closing down the household for the night. In the gardens, the oak sapling stood in darkness, roots beginning to take hold. And in the Duchess's bedroom, two people who'd fought impossible odds to be together simply existed in each other's presence. No performance, no strategy, no armor. Just love. Imperfect and hard-won and absolutely real. The girl who'd made a promise at 10 years old had become a woman who kept it at 20, and the man who'd laughed had become the husband who chose her back. In the end, nothing was accidental. She chose him. And finally, completely, publicly, irrevocably, he chose her too. The fortress had fallen. The war was won. And what rose from the ruins was something neither had expected but both had earned. A life. Their life. Built on stubbornness and sacrifice and the kind of love that only survives because it refuses to die. It wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined. It was better. Because it was real, and that was enough.